here comes to your headset? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, you'll need a workbook. I thought there was one up here. Maybe not. It has a shepherd's crook on the front. Great, thank you. And the intent of this is, I'm going to start. Would you pray with me as we begin this morning? Great Father, we come before you always in your presence, always aware that you know the thoughts and intents of our hearts, our motives. We come before you pleading for forgiveness for the things that we have not prioritized correctly in our lives, for the ways in which we've wasted the great blessings and resources you've given us. But we're thankful for this morning where we can be together with our brothers and think about the significant work that you've given men to do in their lives in many ways, as husbands and fathers, elders and deacons, evangelists, and other roles that we can play in teaching and in admonishing your children, the ones that Christ has died for. Help us this morning to be based in the Word, first of all, and think always in terms of what you have revealed to us, and then respectful of those who have wisdom, whose thinking is rooted in your Word, to benefit from one another and the lessons we've learned either through our own personal experience or through the observation of others who are talented and devoted to you and to the flock that you have given them. We pray the morning would be a blessing to us, it would edify us. Again, examine our hearts as we approach this so that we're not defensive or in some way self-serving as we aspire to these roles or aspire to excel in these roles, but rather we would see this as a way to glorify you and a way to build up the children that you have allowed us to be in this life. We ask these things, offer our praise, our requests in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, I'm going to take a minute just to explain the little bit of the history of how Russ and I got to kind of be doing this thing, okay? We did not write a business plan and print brochures and, figure out how to get into this business. That's not, in fact, I would have never anticipated it at all. I was appointed an elder in 2002, and Russ, 6 or 7? 2006. And as Russ mentioned last night, for decades, despite the fact the church was, 300 and, growing steadily with lots of men who looked just like you, to some extent, right? They had kind of maybe grown up in the church, good Bible knowledge, they had good families, and you're thinking, 5-10 years, we're going to have elders that, galore. And well, it never happened. And so it was kind of frustrating. Russ came in, and as we talked about it, I think it was his proposal, why don't we have some classes just aimed at the skill of being an elder? You know what I mean? And kind of, in a way, skipping over. And by the way, I know we're kind of bashing the whole idea that you have to study the qualifications of elder. Of course you do that. That's the first thing. If you don't have that quality, you can't. The skills don't matter. I was trying to say that last night. We're just not covering that. And we felt like this group of men understood the qualifications and maybe even were working toward that. We could help them maybe. And we did. We did some surveys of each other, assessments of each other, to say, what are you lacking? Or really more accurately, what does the congregation think you're lacking? You see, that's a different question. So we worked on the qualifications to some extent, but our thought was, these guys are kind of scared to be elders, or they don't know what the work is like. It seems like that's something beyond their ability or whatever. Why can't we have a workshop that would help them see the kind of day-to-day activities? How much time is it going to take? What kind of person-to-person skills are going to be required? Those kind of things. And so what our idea was, we actually took a set of men, probably 20 or so, I don't remember, maybe more than that. And Russ and I we weren't the only 2 elders, but the other elders were good with us doing this. They knew what we were doing. And we just took all the men and put some categories down. And you'll find an appendix in there that actually has a table, which is oh, you didn't put the appendix in there? Okay. Anyway, we personally just thought about these men and thought, well, how are they doing in things like organizing their life to have time to do this work, right? Or in terms of having spiritual priorities in their families that if they were selected, they could really put the time and energy into it. Or in terms of just having their life under control, finances, job security, or whatever, so that they wouldn't have other distractions. Or their emphasis on spiritual things, their ability, their persona in front of the church, knowing the Bible, but also having a spiritual view of things. Y'all know what I'm talking about. These are subjective, but still, when you think of a man, you can kind of think, yeah, he's really interested in lots of things besides helping the church, right? That's maybe something he could, you see what I'm saying? So we did that. We picked 6 guys out of that list, really the top 6, and they were almost identical when we did our scoring. And secretly, we said we'd like to have a class with you 6 guys on elder shepherding, because maybe to 5 to 10 years you'll be in that situation. You'll be asked, that's what we think. And so we met secretly, I said that already, on Sunday mornings at what time, 7:30. So we had an hour and a half before everybody started showing up for Bible class. And the reason we did it secretly is we didn't want the church to think we're picking our successors, right? We're grooming the follow-on elders, that kind of thing. When we finished with that, it was 6 weeks. All the elders were there, including Russ and I, but that's where this material came from, I'm telling you. So then after that, we picked 6 more men. Only 6, because we wanted a very small class. We'd, again, 6 more lessons with him, picked 6 more men after that, you know what I mean? Kept doing that. And, we'd, at 10 till 9, we'd be done. We'd kind of walk out, and everybody's getting there for Bible class on Sunday morning. So I felt like it was a failure because 10 years later, still 3 elders, you know what I mean? We're not getting there. Of course, by that time I had resigned, because Mary died, but we weren't getting there. And I don't remember, Russ, when did you finally hit that, like 4 men all at once? What year was that? 2016, yeah. So it was a while later, but maybe 10 years. But some of those very guys were in there. Now, some of them, in fact, a lot of those guys that were in those classes, workshops, moved away. David Maxson comes to mind. You may know who that is. He had been in there. John Weaver is one. But where they went, they kind of were either struggling or thought that the eldership might benefit and development of men was important. So they called these guys. David did. I think John was the first one. And said, could you come up here and do something like what you did, So that's kind of how we got into this traveling salesman business that we're doing here, But anyway. And that's the reason this material is kind of written the way it is. In that the whole, like I said, we had 6 1.5-hour class period. Class is not the right word. Just workshop. Just to talk about stuff. And if we get a benefit this morning, so you understand that when we do this, well, what's the church going to do if all the men meet on Saturday? So we thought, well, we can put some sermons together maybe, you know what I mean? So that's what you heard last night. That's what you're going to hear Sunday morning. But that's kind of an add-on. And the intent of those, in my view, I'm just saying this to you guys, is to kind of help the church have a different view of elders. You understand what I mean? If we're going to learn the skills, let's have people start to understand, yeah, that's a different view of elders than we normally think of, right? What's our typical view of elders is that they get in front of the in remembrance of me table. And I'm sure glad you have this. I was sure that you were a sound church when I saw this table with the engraving on it. But this is a specific elder position, right? Isn't that right? I mean, you think of an elder doing his work, what are you thinking? Well, he's right here. What's he doing? He's announcing a thing, or he's, you know what I mean? Encouraging the flock, or saying the preacher did an okay job, or whatever he's saying, but it's kind of a flock shepherding in the assembly kind of public thing. That isn't, I don't think that's where the elders' hours and hours of work actually end up being done. And it's not in a meeting room either, by the way. It's somewhere else. We're trying to get that across to the church. You see that? To everybody who will be better followers if they see elders as that. But for you guys, we want to share practical things. And when we've done these before, we're all, man, we did not talk about how elders work with deacons, right? And the way we write job descriptions and hold them accountable, give them some idea of what their budget authority is and things that empower them to offload from this, We forgot to talk about that. Man, we forgot to talk about how you either share things with your wife or you don't. We forgot to talk about the confidentiality of personal problems with the other elders. Y'all see what I'm saying here? Those are hard questions, and they're matters of judgment, really, for an eldership to work through, but they better work through them. And you need to have some kind of agreement, personal idea about how this is going to work. That's what I'd like to do today. You see that? I'm sorry I haven't had y'all work, and we'll do that in just a second, but are you convinced that we're beginning with a spiritual basis for this? I mean by that a scriptural basis, Bible teaching. I hope you saw that last night. We won't really review some of that, but I'm going to still do an exercise to start to kind of say, no, we're rooted in the Word. Start with that. Even if we think eldering would be better if we did it a different way, we're not going to do that. On the other hand, once you got that basis, there's lots of judgment you got to figure out. Right? Like, how do elderships work together? What do you do when a member comes, or a Christian you think might be a Christian, comes and wants to become a member? Does the Bible tell explicitly how to do that? No, but there's some best practices that you might want to think about and adopt and put in. Y'all see what I'm getting at, right? That's what we want to do this morning. It's a workshop. So you should ask questions. And I will probably say, Russ, what do y'all do about that? But anyway, or somebody else here can answer that question. But we need to be approaching it from that point of view. Okay, open the workbook. I have listed our favorite passages on the work of an elder. Notice that they don't include 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 as we talked about last night. I am not denigrating those passages. Start with that. But then, what do they do? What I'd like you to do is just read those and remind ourselves what is God's revelation to us about what elders do. And what I'd like you to do to make it interesting is underline all the words that relate to rule or submission. That's, those are two sides of the same coin. Somebody rules, somebody submits. And as Russ said last night, and I'll try to stop saying that over and over, the only power, authority, enforcement that an elder has is the submission of the flock. Y'all understand that. This is not like a policeman or a... So do that. And while you're at it, you might also circle the terms. I don't know. Did I say circle here? But note, let's just say circle any other action verbs. So if there's a verb like teaching or knowing or whatever, exhorting, admonishing, those kind of things, just do that. So you can work together if you want, but I just want us to read these passages with purpose and then talk about some of the content. All right, let's do it. Call out a verse and the phrase that reflects some sense of rule and submission. And I'm going to put the word authority in there in the sense that, you know, there's a authority. What do you see? Call them out. Rule over you. I would say about that, and also verse 17, that in the Greek, the word is hegeomai. We get our word hegemony from that, the idea of one nation ruling over another. It's the very word that Stephen uses in his sermon in Acts 7, and it's also used about, Luke says, when Quirinius was governor of wherever he was governor of. That word governor is that word, a noun version of that verb. And when Stephen said that in his sermon that Joseph was put over Pharaoh, that's the word there. Joseph ruled over. So I think it's not correct, not scriptural to say, well, elders are just examples, that Bible doesn't really talk of them in an authority role. That's not true. Now, we can kind of quibble about how that authority is exercised and all that, but it's a pretty clear term. You see that in there. Now, the question of what is their domain of rule, that's a valid one. We'll talk about that. But still, there's no fuzz on the fact that there's a clear words of authority and obedience and stuff like that. Okay, give me some more words. Where do you see there? Others. Okay, so there's an action verb. So we're kind of collecting two things as we go. Thank you. So interesting that rule is connected, at least in the verse, it's in the same verse, with the idea of I'm telling you what the Bible says. Right? I've spoken the word to you. Good. It may be that verse 7 there is a little bit of a retrospective. Again, the good old American standard indicates that. If you read it, it says who had the rule over you, not who rule over you. So there's a sense of present perfect tense or something like that. So the sense is, you know, he's saying, as he's often said to the Hebrews, remember the past. You know, you've done well. You've held, don't fall back, you know. But he's saying, remember those who had the rule over you and that they taught you the Word of God. And remember how their life turned out. It's interesting he's adding that in. So I think the sense of setting an example in priority, in faithfulness, in courage, whatever, that's clearly a part of the elder's role. Okay? Keep going. Good. That's right. And there's almost, yes, I won't say, you guys know what that means. But it seems to me a very deep kind of a challenging word to watch out, like you're looking way off in the distance, you know, what's going on, and you're looking in a kind of a deep and perceptive way for problems that might exist, that other people might not even see, may not feel obligated to see, but also it's subtle, maybe subtle signs that you might watch for. And that's kind of typical too in Acts 20 when he says, you know, take heed to yourselves and to the flock. There's this careful watching that we're not good at, because in America we all have our private lives, you know, don't be meddling in my affairs, you know. But I watch the body language of your wife, you know, and I can tell she's not happy. Something's not right. Right? Is that watching in behalf of a soul? Is that taking heed? Y'all know what I'm talking about. It's kind of, and yet you're kind of reluctant to meddle in somebody else's, you know, they haven't asked for help, so what am I doing, you know? Yeah. I'm so lazy, I feel guilty half the time. But anyway, so, good. 1 Thessalonians 5. That's right. So great, this is great. And their work's sake there. So there's the definite sense of labor and work, but then there's the authority kind of thing. Anybody can admonish anybody. In fact, Paul told Timothy to admonish the older men as fathers, right? So but still, here it says there, what does he say? How does it say it? Or over you in the Lord. And we don't really list that often about as a passage for elders because none of those three, but you know, overseer and shepherd, those are not in the verse. In fact, just to kind of help indoctrinate you on our idea that sheep shepherding is the main thing, go back and look at that passage, the verse before and the verse after. It's all about admonishing, helping one another personally, right? Admonish the weak, the faint-hearted, something like that. I don't remember the exact. But go look at that context. And in the middle of those two verses about y'all take care of each other, Paul is saying to the Thessalonians. He says, and by the way, those who are over you in the Lord, they have a special, piece of that personal exhortation and so on. That's 1 Thessalonians 5. It's a rich passage. Okay, keep going. 1 Timothy 5. Different word for rule there, I think, if I remember right. But rule well. What else?
What about the phrase at the beginning? It says, let the elders. Is that spoken to the elders or is that spoken to the people?
Well, the whole thing in Timothy is a little bit, to me, raises an interesting question. Who is he writing Timothy to? Well, obvious answer, but really maybe not so obvious. Do you think Timothy knew the qualifications of elders before Paul wrote this letter, which is well after the book of Acts, well after Timothy's been with Paul all over the place, including Ephesus for 3 years? Do you think Timothy didn't know the qualifications for elders? This is not a trick question. It's just yes or no. He's got a 50-50 chance.
He's given him a bunch of things teaching.
Thank you. And so the letter might actually have the role of being Timothy's ticket to say what he says and saying, by the way, this isn't me. Here's the Apostle Paul saying. You see what I mean? And I'm not sure there's be anything in 1 Timothy except maybe take a little wine for your stomach's sake. That would be something Timothy hadn't heard before, right? But it's really a letter so that he would know how men ought to behave themselves in the household of God. Church of God, which is the household of God. Chapter 3, verse 15. So it's really more so back to your point. Let the elders. What is your either question or point about that?
But if it's meant to be addressing the church through Timothy,
There you go.
then you're having to. Sometimes the church stands in the way of an eldership ruling.
Great.
Well.
Right.
Let them.
Right.
Shepherd, let them.
Okay. So it's a little bit like this. Here's the flock. Here's an elder. I go and say, listen, you really need to exercise your rule correctly over these people. You see what's happening? Who's the real audience here? Is that what your point is? The audience is everybody else who's listening to what I'm actually kind of saying.
In the way of their leadership.
Good. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Oh, I see now. I'm sorry, knucklehead. I finally sunk in. Yeah, I don't know if the Greek says let, but your point is allow. I would use that word. Yeah, I don't know either. Like, is he saying to the church, allow the elders? Yes, right. So there's a code here that Russ and I will use. When I say that's a good question, that means I don't know what the answer is. I don't have a clue. If I say that's a great question, that means I was hoping somebody would ask. It's on my next chart, or something like that, Well, that's a good question. Thank you for that. Yeah. But it's an interesting point. Yes, the only rule authority they have is when they're allowed to and followed willingly. But thanks for that good question. Notice how they labor in what? Right. And not in shouting orders and, punishing people. What is the real authority that an elder has to a true Christian? I have to show you in the Word why this is so. I think that's really the heart of it. Now, there's lots of things that people need to hear. You might think that great Christians don't need to know. This is the other way around. The more, and I think I've read this somewhere, the more deeply a person believes and tries to follow the will of God, the more they realize how far they fall short. Y'all know what I mean? You probably had that experience. So so the better there are, the more they're trying, the more interested they would be in this guidance that comes from the Word and doctrine. I will say a little bit more about the elder's role, but are they pictured as the guy that's whipping the ox around, treading out the grain? Are they pictured as the guy who hires the fellow and pays him correctly at the end of the day? Is that the metaphor that's used here? He is the ox. He is the laborer who gets wages at the end of the day. And I think that's consistent with Jesus' teaching about leadership generally. Mark 10, Matthew 20. Who are the great leaders? Who is the greatest in the kingdom? Is one who is servant of all. And none of what he does is for his own benefit or glory or advantage or even good health. All right. Same thing, good works down in 524, suggesting perhaps, 525, the caution with which you should do that. Russ mentioned this last night. I keep saying that. I don't mean to say that. So 3 different things, but the implication is it is a selected office because he's saying take the office willingly. You see? Why would he have to say that if it was just one of those things where a few people get older and they just kind of, you know, by osmosis kind of become elder men or elder women? No, there's an appointment. And if you're asked to serve, do it willingly because it's an appointment. You know, it's a selected task. I think that tells me something about it's recognized. The people in the church know who they are and they know who are not in that. And so it's not, y'all know there's kind of a false teaching that elders are just grow into that as they get older and they don't really have authority and they lead by example. And this is the very verse that they would probably use for that. Not lording it over, but rather being examples. Where's that? 1 Timothy 5? It could be an elder who has a dual role of, right. Could be a dual role of both. Yeah. Same phrase in 1 Corinthians, Paul, in describing his rights as an evangelist to take support, uses this very ox metaphor, right? Yeah. I suppose that means if you're both an elder and a teacher, you should get double the pay. So whatever money you made, you know, you would get double that. Y'all probably did that, didn't you? Right? If he taught a class, you doubled his pay.
We've been doubling the pay of our elders.
Right, every year. They double the pay every year, yeah. Right. But no, I think, you know, there are some first century and second century historians in early church writings that suggest that, in some places at least, when a man was appointed a shepherd of a church, he quit his job. That's what he did. That's all he did. That's all he could do. Yeah, we would call it full time, but you know, meaning that he was dependent on eating the grain that he was treading out, you know, or working as a laborer. And I wonder, we could talk, thank you for bringing that up. We could talk about it. We're just not in that kind of society where we can give up our income or our retirement plans or whatever. But what would you think of a man who said, I'm working hard to retire, I'll take enough to live on from the church, and the rest of my life I'm not going to do anything else but shepherd a flock? Can you imagine how effective that would be? I mean, if he's a good man. I'm a wimp. I probably couldn't do that. But boy, think about that. Especially if he was a knowledgeable man, well respected, and, you know, or in other words, met the qualifications of an elder.
We had a guy when I was down in Illinois years ago that he was an elder and was supported, retired, so he's getting partial support from the church, and it was a huge asset.
Yeah. So Russ, can I share your special year, the story about that? So Russ was joined a company to help them go public. They were going to, you know what go public means in terms of stock and so on. And after trying mightily and probably the economy and stuff, it was pretty clear that wasn't going to happen. They couldn't get enough of the investors to line up and all that. Not Russ's fault. You know, he's just a finance guy anyway. You know, but he was kind of helping run that thing. It was clear it wasn't going to happen, and so the company was going to have to sell everything. So they were consolidating to try to go public, and they're saying, you know, hey, in the end of the year or so, you're going to be out of it. You know, you need to. We're selling everything, you know. So he knew, and he was helping them close everything out, and that was all good. I think he only had a few months, right? Anyway, Russ went to him and said, okay, what if we did this? What if you only paid me half or less of my salary and made it last a year or so instead of just, 4 or 5 months? And they said, okay, sure, that'd be fine. And so then we, the church, willingly, eagerly supported the other half of Russ's income. And so he spent half of his time, workday, working as an elder. That's a good deal. It worked really well. It was a good period of time for us, I think, in particular, but for the church too. And then he got another job. So. Anyway. Okay, so, yeah, question. Yeah, thanks. Which verse? Yeah, that's, I think, what he was saying. And I didn't understand it. I was just dull-headed. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. The sheep, yeah. Right. Asking the question, right. Yeah, right. Which matches kind of the whole theme of 1 Timothy. If you put the brethren in mind of these things, he says, you'll be a good servant. And you'll save both yourself and those that, there's a sense of he's talking to more than one audience. 1 Peter 5, I think we've kind of worked through that. The fact that they could do it, shouldn't do it, but could do it for filthy lucre. Sorry, that's probably old King James language, but, you know, for some profit. Suggests they are handling money. Russ made that point. I meant not to say that. And then in James 5, it seems to be a kind of a combined physical, spiritual, and I don't know for sure how to interpret that verse. We have had the request, I never have had personally, but I think Sewell did, to anoint somebody with oil. I don't know if y'all have your oil ready for that, anointing and so on. But I don't think it's a religious rite, but I think there is this combined physical, spiritual dilemma that people get in. I mean, I think I've seen that. You've sinned, maybe it's an addiction, maybe it's some type of a mess you've got in your marriage, your work, whatever, health into. And so you have this combined physical, spiritual dilemma. Who's going to help you out of that? You know, maybe that's what an elder can do. Okay, I think I've made most of the points. Do you all see in this, there's both a public role, flock shepherding, and a private or care and feeding of individual sheep. We beat that to death last night. But I will ask this question. Which is more visible of those two, flock shepherding or sheep shepherding, just to the ordinary member? Flock for sure, right? Because you get to stand in front of the in remembrance of me table. But, and actually, think of it this way too. The least mature members of the church, they probably don't even appreciate the sheep shepherding side hardly at all, in a way, because they come in there, they have a business model or a license bureau model or a club model in mind, because they don't really quite understand the church or whatever, and tend to think, oh yeah, he's the. That used to bother me when I was first appointed. I felt I was too young anyway, but say, oh, an elder's in the room, kind of joking around, and it was almost offensive to me, because that was not like going to hurt anybody, or fire somebody or threaten somebody or something. And I didn't want that kind of a role, really. Maybe I didn't know exactly what it was at the time. I don't know, but let's see. I need to put my glasses on here. Let's see. So I've covered number 4, the intimate connection with the Word and this rule. I think it's such a healthy sign, and when in a meeting we're discussing, an elders meeting, we're discussing some particular issue, some member, and the elders whip out their Bibles. Have you ever had that happen? Like, what actually is? Can we look at this verse? Well, I kind of know where it is, but let's look at it more closely. What do we need to do? Or what would we present to this person to help them see? You know what I mean? So it's really just intricately tied to the Word. 5, we've talked about what's the power of enforcement. And, of course, that is the cooperation. And I think there's a link this way. If a man shows his trustworthiness, his credibility, his motive, his unselfish motive in the qualifying process, he's much more likely, almost inevitably, will be followed and submitted to in the actual exercise of authority. Was that too long of a sentence? Y'all see what I'm getting at? And you know this. I I think I mentioned this to someone after last night. So at Georgia Tech, I taught some graduate courses in kind of leadership topics. So I had to read all the business literature, you know, 7 Habits and the Leadership Challenge, Jesus and Posner, and Jim Collins, Leaders Do, and, you know, Good to Great. Y'all know all these books if you're in business. You probably heard of them. Inevitably, and Covey's, you know, several different books. Inevitably, they all start with saying, you know what, you have to have your own character right before you can do all these other tricky things we're going to tell you about in the book here. And if you don't, that's going to be ineffective. And I think that's God's wisdom as it's described in the qualifications of elders. All right, let's, so what we tried to do, let's go on to page 2 here, or 3, or whatever page you got numbered there. Under the C, let's go ahead and skip the C, I think, unless y'all want to talk about any of the other stuff. But C, and what we did with this workshop with these guys was to say, guys, what we're going to try to do is think of all the things that we think is our job as elders, right? Now, here's where I'm taking what I hope is a very firm Bible basis. And I'm trying to say, okay, now let's start to think about, just from our own experience and our own judgment, how could, in a modern, you know, 21st century church, what would this look like? And so we actually built 2 job descriptions. One had to do with flock shepherding tasks, and one had to, because, you know, we're both corporate guys. You know, we don't know what to do but write a job description, you know. You know what I mean? So that's us. But so we did. And so there's a flock shepherding duties, and do you still have the sheep shepherding duties? It'll be part of his. What I'd like to do is just read through these, and I want you to challenge me, saying that's not their job, or I don't get what you mean by that, or yeah, but what if? Or how do you do this? There's some specific mechanisms that you all have tried. Y'all see what I'm getting? I'm trying to get realistic, you know, day-to-day kinds of descriptions of these. Let's work through those. So the first 2 round bullets under C1, a list of tasks, are both, I think, things that you just happen. They're reactive. You don't prepare. You're not strategic about it. You just got to act right now. You see that? So let's read them and then talk about it. Make immediate reactive decisions and responses, such as this. And these are all from our experience. So, you know, there's 2 women, and, you know, they're kind of in-laws, and they're not getting along. They have a big dispute, you know, and the poor husband in the middle of the thing doesn't know what to do. So he brings them to the elders and say, help these women. You know, well, I didn't plan for that, right? I was actually hoping to get home in time to watch some of the ball game Sunday night or whatever, you know, but there they are. You see what I mean? So that's kind of reactive. You don't have a choice. You just do that. And I always picture physical sheep, you know, which is kind of fun. If you look at them, and you know, if you're a shepherd especially, you know they're all weird. They're all different. They're, you know, and sometimes they look alike at first, but after a while you realize, no, each one has their own. And one's over there shivering and afraid of everything, you know, another one's just out kicking other sheep, you know, inadvertently, you know, bulling the china shop, to use another animal imagery. You know what I mean? Others are always honking off, and, you know, they will not keep quiet. They talk without thinking. You know, others will never tell you anything. You know what I mean? Some are off, you know, alone by themselves. They don't like to be around a lot of people. Other people are always under everybody's business. You know, I'm picturing sheep, you know, nosing at each other. And you know what I mean? This is the way sheep are, right? And so it helps me to think of it that way, so that because I'm more of an introvert, and I think people should be orderly. But if they're not, I have trouble being patient, you know, with someone. You know what I mean? They're having a temper tantrum. They're having a bout of depression or mood swing. You know what I mean? And I'm thinking, you control yourself, you know. But that's, you know, you just say, well, no, sheep are just that way. And you deal with that, and maybe you can help them grow. But you don't reject them or find fault or condemn them for their personality. So, but anyway, that's one. There are also almost always benevolent, you know, needs and requests from among the group. And we have what we've termed walk-ups. Do y'all have those here? It depends on where your building is and whether you're in Trussville or not, I guess. But Yeah, okay. But you know the deal. So we are very close to the interstate, which has lots of overpasses, if that means anything to you, and cheap motels and bus stop right out front of the building, you know what I mean? So for a while, we got kind of go through periods, but there'll be people who walk up, we call them walk-up benevolent cases. And, y'all are not asking questions, I don't know. If you don't, I'm going to bore you to tears.
I
But
definitely have a question. I would say in terms of settle arbitrary issues and squabbles,
yeah.
how are they addressed, within the eldership? Examples that you can give, one elder, two elders, multiple,
Yeah.
the whole group. Depending on the situation, I think there's a level of judgment there. I've heard of, cases before where people have their elder that they go to,
Mhm.
and they may get a different response from one than they would get from another,
Mhm.
based on the situation.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of go through
Great.
what's the best case to
Mm.
kind of settle those types.
That's a great question. And it really is not just settling squabbles, it's all kinds of things. It could be a moral issue, it could be a financial issue, it could be a doctrinal question. I mean, it could be lots of things. And, I would like some of the other elders and Russ as well to kind of have a point of view. Yes, of course they'll favor one elder over another. And that's one of the advantages of having 10. My experience was we had 3, and then we had a deluxe period where we had 4, right? Once Russ came on board. You're like, now they have 10. And it is the case. And that also, the larger the number, the better in that sense, but also the more difficult it would be for everybody to share everything and become unified on how we're going to deal with this particular personal problem. This is exactly the kind of discussion I like to have, so more contribution would be useful. But there are, I think in these first 2 bullets where you got to answer it right now, you can't wait till you have an elders meeting and say, okay, we're going to decide which of you 2 women who are not getting along is right, which is a bad approach anyway, you know what I mean? No, I think you're working on a personal level all along. And that leads to the question, well, then when do you share and how do you share and how much do you wait before you make a judgment and all that? And Russ, you can talk about that if you want, but you have to establish a policy and trust and understanding, but he'll talk about that.
I think that's part of the key is that the elders have already established among themselves this trust and idea that, hey, if something like that happens, yes, you need to resolve it and work on it. Or if somebody brings you some very personal information and they don't want it to be shared more broadly, we trust you to go and to deal with that. But it's also the trust that you have sufficient judgment to know when the other elders need to
Right.
know about that.
And when is that?
Just for your, because I wasn't thinking, I think yours is a good example.
Yep.
If this is somebody inclined to go to their favorite elder for one answer, and they get a different one. Right. Well, I need to be aware of that, and of that danger, and quickly tell the other elder, in that case, this is what the issue is, this is what I told them. We can kind of work it out, but, sometimes it's in the immediate, gotta do it. Sometimes it's, I'm not sure, I'm gonna have to go ask first.
So I think if I heard you correctly, and I will go through a period of repeating just to make sure I understand. If you see something or a behavior like that, where you see, approaching 2 different men seeking a different answer, any type of unified front to make sure you're in lockstep with what you're telling the person.
So Sewell, he's like the elder. Among us. I don't know how many of you know Sewell. He's 92. He served as an elder, 2 different stints, probably 35, 40 years plus. And he only resigned about 10 years ago. But Sewell says that the way to divide any church is to let it be known that the elders have very different influence over certain people. And so it's not even a matter of just kind of dealing with these individuals. I think it's a lot of flock shepherding part. That when we're making bigger decisions, and we're not on the same page, we shouldn't be on the same page. That's part of the wisdom of God's plan. Have multiple men in the role bringing different viewpoints to what should we do, but we can't let it be viewed as
brother so-and-so is going to present the minority opinion to the group, you know.
They always try to say, okay, the eldership says that.
Which is back to Marty's point about get your Bibles out, try to figure this out, because we want to find something that all of us can unite around and then present that united front. The last thing we ever want to do is what you said. Oh, we made a decision. It was a 2-to-1 majority. It was a strong majority, right?
Or worse, it's announced by one elder and another one's sitting in the pew doing this. And you know, I think that's, so back to the flock and sheep thing. What does that do to the weaker sheep to see division in the eldership? You see that?
They begin to believe it's political type.
Or exactly right. It's the wrong view. And I think this is a millstone about the neck and thrown into the ocean kind of a sin when you discourage a weak, young Christian by your own inability to be unified and submit to one another, which is the rest of that verse, right? Even if my judgment doesn't win the day. Yeah, thanks.
I imagine, and I've seen the business model approach in churches. The elders get together once every so often and they discuss things. That's really the only time they spend together is when they sit behind a closed door at the table and decide what direction churches will go in. I would assume to do what y'all described, there is a lot of time that has to be spent together or sometimes put together as an eldership. I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Why don't you talk about a typical agenda and frequency of what y'all do here? So.
So part of it is just, you still have to meet together, right? It's like people, but especially when there were 4 of us, we would just kind of plan it out every month and figure out, well, what's our schedule? When would be a good time to get together?
Not once a month, but through that, for that whole month. In fact, we had an elder of the month who was responsible to call the meetings, take the meeting minutes, and, that kind of thing. So that was a rotating duty. But.
When it became 8 of us, it was like, we can't do that. We got to have some regular time. So we meet, we might shift it, but it's on the calendar. Second Saturday morning of the month and the last Monday night of the month. So there's about 5 to 6 hours that we're going to be together. We know that ahead of time. But in a typical month, there will be 3 to 4 other meetings that meet with new members somewhere. Zoom is great. I mean,
Well, even,
had
yeah.
to do that during all this, but we've had a number of really productive, here's a quick issue, and we can all sit at our home and jump on the Zoom or Teams and quickly see each other and make a decision about something kind of important. The other thing that's been really valuable is just having a group text. That everybody sees it and we're communicating, because you can do that in the middle of the day. And so there's so much more communication going on regularly, even than there was 10 or 12 years ago, because of the technology that can kind of tie you together that we couldn't do before. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I was just curious, like, do y'all, and the size of the eldership there probably would be somewhat prohibitive, and you're having to get together maybe a lot more than a smaller church would have to deal with things. A church of this size, you wouldn't have to necessarily meet as much, there wouldn't be as many issues as a church of 500.
Right.
But I was just picturing getting together and spending time together so that you can be unified.
You mean just kind of outside of your
Right.
meetings and things?
Yeah.
You got to find some opportunities.
They meet enough hours that I think that takes care of itself.
These 3 men that are being appointed as elders now, so the first time we're going to get together is Monday night. We've invited our wives. It's at somebody's house. It's really meant to be a little bit more of just
Onboarding kind of.
onboarding type, not just going through it. But we do have a very specific agenda to try to get through that would touch on most of those things where we might not be on the same page. We're going to come up every time we're together as elders. But back to the trust part, what that means is, though, is that we've decided, here's a matter that's got to be dealt with. Maybe it's the Bible classes. What are the adult Bible classes going to be? Well, a couple of us elders put more time into that than the other elders do. But it's a plan all of us have to be behind. So at some point, we work with some of the deacons, put something together, then report it back to everybody else. But that's a little faster way than if 10 of us tried to sit in on a discussion with two deacons about what the Bible class.
And that's grown as the eldership has expanded, right? That division of labor, because that, yeah. So they got to 7 or 8, and then 9, and then back to 8, and so on. And I think that's more important then. So the other piece of kind of process that I think you have to be unified. This is a meta-unification, right? About not just we all agree on this issue, but we agree on how we work, right? To describe it, is that I think there's a trust, as he said, that Russ. So I'm off. You realize we're kind of slipping into sheep shepherding things now, right? This disagreement thing. What makes it a flock shepherding issue is this can't be spread and divide the church. You see what I mean? But really, the sheep shepherding piece is help these women. Help them. Help. But anyway, you got to have a level of trust that says, okay, Marty was just the elder hanging around, or the one they liked the best, or I don't know what, but they called him in, and he just had to deal with it right then. Now, then the question becomes, do I need to share that with all the other elders? How soon, how quickly, and that kind of thing. So there's these other factors that play in. Is it going to blow up and become a church issue by next Wednesday night? I'm going to call all the elders, right? On the other hand, if it's already just private, they're not proud of this, they're not going to share it, the fewer people know, the easier this healing will be, I'm going to keep it to myself. And there's maybe this intermediate thing, and they have to trust me that Marty will do the right thing, right, as an elder. And there's this intermediate thing where it says, I'm working on an issue with so-and-so, right, this marriage or this individual or whatever. I'm not at a point where I think it's beneficial to share it with all you guys, right? The other reason is I don't know what to say to him. Russ, I call Russ, say, Russ, this is confusing me. Help me. I need to talk this through with you. That's another reason. But it could be with the person, you say, let's talk about how widely this should be known. And, and then you agree with the person. I am not going to share this with the elders unless these certain things happen. Now, if the person says, I'm going to tell you something and don't tell anybody about this, do not run away from that. Do not agree to that. Because there are all the circumstances that lead up to it's going to divide the church, or I need help from one of the other elders, or something like that. You just can't rule those out front. But you understand what I mean? But I think before the counseling session is over with a couple or with a person who's been trapped in some sin, is to say, here's where I stand right now. I'm going to probably share this with my wife. Are you okay with that? Or not. I won't share it with her. You know what I mean? We can talk about it. And I'm probably going to bring Russ into this because he's had experience, whatever. You okay with that? You know what I mean? So it's not only an agreement between the elders about when do we share what, right? And a trust that, yes, I'm working an issue. You don't all need to know about it, right? So there's that trust. Then there's also that you establish the trust with the sheep to say, here's the level of sharing I'm going to do. So that's, I don't know if that helps with you. I think we're way off the question. We're also way into sheep shepherding. So Russ, your session will be way shorter, won't it?
It just seems there's a parallel here. Maybe I'm wrong, and I'd like to hear in terms of what you think about this. But we talk about flock and the sheep, but there's also a parallel in the eldership and elders individually, in that sometimes the elders, they've been ordained, they've been appointed, they've met qualifications, they need to be able to act a little bit independently sometimes too, and not necessarily as the collective. Because circumstances demand it.
Yeah.
And so there's wisdom and there's humility and there's all these other things.
And trust. I mean, and isn't it a wonderful plan that God put in place that men are trustworthy as one of their qualifications, right? And they're beyond reproach and all those other things that suggest if I was ever going to trust anybody, right, it would be a Christian. It would be this man, even among Christians. And so the basis for that is just already there. It's almost like a given. Thank you. And by the way, I'm going to jump down. Remember, we're trying to talk about flock shepherding issues. But I have a question down, let's see. Look down. It probably is on the, look down under 2, question B, 2B, because it comes up several times here. We're talking about flock shepherding decisions. And which operational decisions, and operational I mean like, just getting classes and worship and buying stuff and getting a building built and and you know, all the things that are required, could be delegated to someone else, an evangelist or deacon. Well, maybe.
That was my point on with the last discussion.
Yeah.
You've got to delegate responsibilities and trust them to not micromanage.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great comment, actually. But we'll keep going about that, and that is, I think that, especially during those days when we had 4 elders and 400 people, there was no way that would be done without the 28 deacons that we had. And now, what do you have, Russ? 30? I don't know. 28 or so. Well, you're going to have to appoint some more. Yeah, so now we're down 3, but here's the point. And every one of those deacons, and this is one of those practical things. Can't give you the Bible verse for this, but I think there's authority we have for this. Long ago, we started with a specific job description for every single deacon. And now the job descriptions exist to some extent independent of the deacons themselves. So, and how many line items in that are there? 40 or 50, right? These are tasks. They got to be done. They got to be managed. And implicit in those write-ups, again, we're corporate people. We don't know. You know, that's all we know to do. But implicit in those write-ups are a level of delegation and authority to spend money, to go tell people to do stuff. Look at Acts 6. He says, you select from among yourselves men whom we may appoint over this matter. I kind of imagine that those 6 or so men, proto-deacons, if you want, probably didn't serve tables themselves either. Is that a possibility? I don't think the 6 would have been enough to do it. They were over the matter. They figured out where is the food or the money. Who's trustworthy to go get this done, right? Who will kind of check up on this, you know, that kind of thing. And I'm kind of proud, not in some prideful way, the way Ember Hills operates is, you know, these guys are doing a multi-million-dollar building decision. It's over-constrained. There's no solution. That's where they are. But still, the deacons are doing the work. Why? Because we have deacons who are like construction managers and civil engineers, and they're way more qualified to do that, interact with the county. They do that on their job. You know what I mean? Now, a guy like Russ, he's all in the finances of it, right? Because that's what he does. But he doesn't have to be. He could delegate that. In fact, he probably have delegated a good bit of that to somebody else who's in finances, their line of work. And that's true with the adult classes, deciding what to study, develop a deep plan, do the analysis. What have we studied lately? What's the need? We have 4 or 5 adult classes, not counting the high school and middle school. And we have, you know, decades of history of what we've studied. We have a pool of teachers. Who is qualified to teach? Who do we trust to teach this particular topic in this particular setting, in the auditorium, for example? These are hard. You could spend your life doing that, or you could have trustworthy deacons to take over that. And it isn't that they do the physical and the elders do the spiritual. That's not it at all. No, all of these things kind of touch on the spiritual. Selecting worship leaders. Now, what are the touch points? And these are kind of the practical things you think of. What are the touch points the elders need to have? Well, let's look at the list of teachers that you're using. I may know something about them that you need to know. And this one is fine for high school maybe, but just, they're not in the auditorium, you know. Or this one, I know something, I can't tell you what it is, but in my own mind I'm thinking, he and his wife are struggling, and it is going to hurt her to see him up there leading prayers. She will be offended by that, right? I just know that. I don't even want to share it with you. I just say don't put him in any public duties. You imagine that happening. And still, the deacon's doing all of that. He's saying, here's the duty list, and I'm publishing it. I'm going to remind you. You'll get a text right before the service to say you're doing the, y'all see what I'm getting at here. So a lot of what enables the sheep shepherding work is that the flock shepherding work is managed by deeply spiritual men who are full of the Holy Spirit, as Acts 6 and other things, you know. And that's, it seemed to me, is an enormous enabler and probably make things happen better than if these knuckleheads tried to do it all themselves, you know, in areas that they don't even have expertise. Yep.
Could you touch on the concept that the elders handle the spiritual work and the deacons handle the physical work?
Yeah, I just said that facetiously, didn't I? Yeah. So I would probably not, so I would have trouble drawing a line and say spiritual, physical. And just the same way, you can't hardly draw the line as flock and sheep, because they affect each other, right? I mean, some are clearly at either end. So imagine more of a spectrum, right? And I do think there is a kind of an operational end of things. Getting the building clean. It's hard to connect that to many spiritual issues. You could make up a story, but not really, right? But what do we study in the adult classes? Managing groups that actually talk to visitors, or actually chase down members who we haven't seen in a few weeks and collect some information. Where's that? Is that spiritual? That's mostly spiritual, it seems like to me. You know what I mean? But it's kind of a task that's manageable enough that I think the deacons can do it. I've listed some references here. Acts, yeah.
I can clip up a minute or two.
Yeah.
So there is something there about equipping people, working with deacons, kind of a sheep shepherd part. So you can think about those deacon tasks. Some of them would be more spiritual in nature than
And sheep shepherding related, not flock related, yeah.
making sure that the trees get trimmed back on a regular basis or something. Well, which deacons should do that? And kind of thinking about the idea of equipping someone, take the next step, be ready for something. You know, we think about which deacons, maybe as you look at their course of life, their abilities, who's going to serve in different capacities, who would be challenged by this more spiritually minded work, but even kind of gets involved in who's assigned which task along the way. Or maybe they've been wonderful. We've got somebody who's great at dealing with benevolent issues. He's been doing it for like 6 or 7 years, loves to do it, put all extra time. He's got to do something different. He needs to grow. And so kind of figure that part of it out.
Does the term overseer, though, not encompass the physical part as well? Like if the trees don't get trimmed,
Yeah.
are you gonna blame the deacon, or is it gonna be the?
I think that's a good question. Well, I guess I should say.
It's a great
I
question.
know the answer.
It's a great question, then.
Yeah, of course, Steve. I think you're exactly right, that ultimately it is our responsibility. But those kinds of things, if I know that there are men who are fully capable of taking care of that and will spend the right amount of money and so forth, then I'm not going to go spend my time trying to figure out, hey, did you do this or what? I'm not going to micromanage it. But ultimately, yeah, I think we're responsible.
Some deacons didn't grow up in the corporate world, they don't understand that they're taking ownership of something.
Hey,
Like if you delegated, I want you to do it, I don't want it coming back to me,
yeah.
the questions, details, I gave it to you, do it.
It's so interesting working with deacons. There's some who only have to say that one time. Hey, go, you take care of it. And man, as they're gone and they're doing it, and somebody else is just as capable, but you got to spend like the next year convincing them. No, we really do mean it. You are the one. You can do this. It's okay. But that's part of dealing with different personalities and different.
And the next step beyond that is, okay, you're the deacon, and this is your job, you don't have to do it all by yourself.
Thank you. Good. A point over this matter. And in fact, yeah. So talk about so if we have a deacon of attendance kind of thing. Well, he can't count everybody in all the classes. One of the things that's been beautiful about that is he'll go and list some of these college age guys, say, you know what, this is your set of pews here. We need to check off the families that are here. And they don't know who these families are. I mean, I was in college, I couldn't call the names of the families, in a church. Well, they have to learn that. And so you start to see this growth where this responsibility is delegated. So oversight, absolutely agree. There are several touch points. I think the first one is when you write a job description. This is what we want you to do. And here's kind of the outcome we expect. And there's some implicit authority in that. Now, if it turns out you need $500,000 to get that microphone system set up, let's talk about that, But there's some sense of, what's the threshold. But if you have to spend $10 to go buy a connector, I don't want to know about it. I just don't want to know about it. It's not like you can't, no, And so the other touch points are these, which and I think we have one of the tools as well as processes that the elders have is they have an elders and deacons meeting. It's regular. It's an hour long every month. And in the room, there are all these guys, each one with their own little, job instructions, right? And now they're free to come to the elders all the time. And I'm sure they do, but less is more, right? But here in the room, there are these other deacons. And so that is a case where they're free to comment on other duties that other guys have to do, or problems that they just don't know, maybe they're not covered or whatever. But it's an opportunity then very quickly to say, hey, we're going to have to take a tree down. It's probably going to be about $1,000, just to say it out loud. So there's this meeting. That meeting has, I think, a deeper, richer, but more implicit purpose. And that is it's one of the elders' touch points into the congregation. And they can try out an idea, hey, we're thinking about supporting somebody down in South Africa, and here's his credentials, and we think there's this need, and so on. What do y'all think of that? How will the congregation react to that? You see what I mean? And there's like 30 times 2 or 3 given a wife and a mother-in-law and whatever. Now there's a good portion of the flock that is kind of represented, and I don't mean that in a necessarily congressional sense, but they represent a knowledge of how the flock is feeling more generally, and they can reflect that, or their own judgment quite often is just as good or better than us knuckleheads. And they say, well, have you thought about this? And you say, well, no, actually, thank you. We need to think about that. And that kind of thing. So and then what do y'all know? Go around the room every time anybody got any issue related to a brother's, not doing right, an issue that I think's not being addressed. What I heard somebody say was this. Hey, that youth thing went really well. Could we do more of those? All that's fair game. That's what that meeting is for, once a month, hour long. And that's one tool among many, but I'm just saying that's a touch point to your question or point, a correct point about oversight. But I think I can point to, look at Phoebe in Romans 16, 1 and 2. Help this woman because she's a helper of many, right? She has some service she's providing. House of Stephanos, 1 Corinthians 16. They do good work. You guys sign up and submit to them. Are they elders? I don't think so. They're just doing a good work. Let's all jump in and do that with them. So I think there's Bible precedent. And in the absence of elders, I think that same pattern kind of lasts on. Rather than now you have a kind of this total level democracy of everybody kind of trying to think of what to do, and is that okay with everybody, which seems unlikely on any issue to be the case, right? Why can't you say, for now, temporarily, would you take over the adult class planning? Is everybody okay with him having that duty for a while? And would you submit to him in carrying out that duty? Y'all are looking at me like he's way off the deep end now. I believe that's close to the Bible pattern of what deacons would do. And it may be a way around the entropy, sorry to use a physics term, the wasted energy, that comes along with the so-called, random level business meeting, men's meeting, whatever it's called, to say, you know how to do this, right? Because the kind of work you do in your business or whatever. So could you take this over? And we'll get back together and talk about what's working and what's not, what help you need, all that. Still, that may be a way to work through when you have no elders, but you still have people who need to be in charge and running things. Yep. Absolutely. That's right. In fact, they even invite, that's right, they even invite old, decrepit, retired elders as well to come to that.
Yeah, that deacons and elders meeting, elders, evangelists, and former elders. To make sure
Yeah.
Marty and Sewell.
So, this is great. This is the kind of discussion I wanted to have. More on the practical level of flock. But do you notice how often we've gotten into sheep shepherding as part of this whole thing? And that's true. But I do think that the way flock shepherding is managed, these corporate issues, operational issues, sorry to use that corporate kind of term, how well that's kind of delegated to zealous, competent, high-quality, integrity men, that's going to enable the flock shepherding work to be way more effective. That's an obvious point. Everybody understands that. But I think that if we have the view, the corporate flock shepherding view of the elder is this guy, right? And if you ask him, well, are we going to take that tree out or not that's rotted? And, you wouldn't want to, as an elder, say, I don't know. I don't know, ask so-and-so. He's the deacon over that. Is that okay? Absolutely, I would be proud to say that, right? Yeah, Jack is in charge of that. And he knows what he's doing better than I do, for sure. And he'll do the right thing. I trust him in that. So if you want to know, go ask him. He's the guy. And we might, I think we still have it posted in a public space. The elder job description, deacon job descriptions, right. So somebody has an issue with, hey, I need projector bulbs out in the classroom. Don't go to the elders. They're the last people that can help you. Sorry. But you go to the board and say, okay, who do I get to help me with that? And not now. I mean, you could count Sewell was in a dual role that way. Sure, and with reason. Bypassing, I'm not sure I'd go there. I'm going to let Russ answer that, except just to say that's a very natural thing. And I remember one issue we had back when David was with us, and that is he converted a lot of people, and many of them, just because of sin, they struggled with life, money, job, health, whatever. And of course, they saw David as their spiritual father, with good reason. And where did they go when they needed money or whatever? Well, David ended up, I felt like, my judgment was his work was being diluted. And also, the sense of the clarity of what the gospel is about. Is it about improving your life and paying your bills, or is it about being, acceptable to God? And I don't know if he was compliant as much as we wanted him to be, but we'd say, David, don't give him money. You need to hand that off. We have deacons for that. You know what I mean? To try to segregate that role out. There's a case where I think we would have to segregate it some. But I think just like any other members, there are great shepherding jobs that some evangelists maybe even are better at. It may be in teaching and other things. So there's clearly an overlap there. The fact that Paul, as an evangelist, used himself as a pattern of shepherding, that says something in Acts 20, same way. So,
More recently is kind of what happened with David Maxson too, that our evangelists end up getting pulled into what otherwise would be shepherding.
Yeah.
But it's a joint effort, right? That one way or the other, they're going to know some things that we need to know. And so when we meet regularly with those evangelists, oftentimes we ought to spend a little more time thinking about, well, what's our theme going to be next year? What are some of those flock shepherding kind of issues that
teaching emphasis,
that we
yeah.
could be working together with them. But a lot of times what we end up spending much of the time that we have available is talking about brother so-and-so, sister so-and-so. Hey, we just got through as elders talking through these weak members. Who are you working with?
What do you know?
What's going on?
Yeah.
What do you know about so-and-so's situation? And sharing that, and they're just a tremendous resource of information. But as Marty said, they need their opportunity to go teach the gospel, do things. They can't be constantly doing what otherwise might be arguing. So,
And a huge time burden, obviously. Yeah. Thanks, that's, yeah. Do you all have meetings still with just the evangelists, the elders and evangelists? Yeah.
Just to piggyback, it's not even a piggyback call, it's more of a question in terms of, is there purpose behind, from what you guys are practicing out there, as you're appointing deacons over these roles, you're also training future elders, perhaps, in the latitude of sense of giving authority over smaller portions of work that needs to be done, even if it's physical work, because what that does is demonstrate to the congregation, I would think, anyway, that this man's capable. And is
Yeah,
it
let's say it together. That's a great question. Great question, yeah. So I'm going to take a long running start, and because I want to mention something, it's probably out of order, but it may be a recommendation. Back before Russ was appointed, but around the time that his selection occurred, we started a practice when we kind of said, theoretically, we're always looking for elders. We don't do this in a kind of a, every 3-year thing. Always, we should all be evaluating each other to be developing ourselves and say. So what we did is in the elder selection form, so to speak, when we handed it out, we had I would say 4 questions. One is, who's qualified right now, today, to serve? I'll submit to them if they're appointed, right? That's question 1. Second question, you can tell there are 3 more questions, right? Third one is, here are some names of people, I don't know them as well, but I would submit to them because I don't know anything bad. And so if the congregation feels they're qualified, that allows me to put a name down that I don't have to be 100% sure because I just got here 2 years ago. I just don't know that guy very well. Large congregation. But if a lot of other people put their name down, I'm in. I'm happy to hear that you know, that's question 2. And now out of that, these forms, by the way, only go to the elders. But out of that, you begin to see a larger list of names, and you kind of get a better sense of, yeah, though this guy's such a glad-handed fellow, everybody puts his name. Now, this guy's kind of quiet, but actually his name showed up quite a bit in question 2 and question 1, so that's good. That's good to know. Question 3 was, this will kind of put you back a little, but we did it, and it was a good thing. It's been helpful. Are there men that you think others believe are qualified, but you would have an objection? Or a concern or question. Now, what that allows people to do is to say, there's a guy, if his name goes on there, I'm going to be a little bit worried because I had this interaction, because I know this thing, because whatever. It only goes to the elders, right? And it's basically allowing a kind of a negative vote in the sense, sorry to say vote, I didn't mean to say that, but you know, it's basically saying, if I get as many people who filled in question 3 on this guy as filled in question 1 or 2 on this guy, there's a problem, right? That means if I put his name forward, people are going to feel pressured either to object or not endorse it if even they don't say anything, right? But it also allows, and we do this, we did it. We go sit down with the men who kind of have lots of entries in question 3. We say, we're not going to tell you who, but you just need to know there's like 20% of the people who turned in a form said this, that you need to work on. And here, in fact, in one case in particular, I just said to the man, and I have developed a development plan for you. Here's what I'd like to do to help these people understand that that's not really the way you are. Right? And we'll put you, now back to your question. He's a deacon. I can put him over duties that are people-oriented or over a teaching kind of thing, because show that he really does know the Bible. He just never gets up in front of people. You know what I mean? So that's why that's a great question. But that allows us to do it. And then question 4 was this: are there men that you think will be qualified given current trajectory? Sorry, we don't use that word in the form, not trajectory. But in 5 to 10 years. And what did they need to work on? What, you know, that kind of thing. So now I have a question that I can go to a man who's 5 to 10 years away. He's not a candidate. I'm not asking you to be an elder, but listen, they put your name down, right? And all they're kind of waiting for is to see your kids, you know, or to whatever. So, and then we did it again. You know, like Russ is appointed. Some other men were not, but we could go to them and say, hey, your name did appear in question 1 and 2 a little bit, and also in 3 and also in 4, and here's the kind of thing you need to think about. And here's our plan, including changing your deacon duties or putting you in front of the group to teach more, or, you know, but you might think about hosting teen devotions at your house. You might think about getting involved with some of the weaker Christians on a personal basis. You know what I mean? And so even though the form doesn't go out but every 3 or 4 years, yeah, that's a background opportunity to kind of, you know, put the pipeline, you know, in place and get it full of people coming in. And the cool thing is, guys like Barry Caudle, who at the time was, what, 30s maybe, I don't know. Yeah, he's in the 5 to 10 year list, right? But I can watch the next time we did it, he got like 20% of the people put his name in 1 or 2. The next time it was 40. You know what I mean? So you have then this, and so we've been doing it now for what, 15 or maybe almost 20, 15 years, let's say. I have this history of particular men who have been moving through the pipeline and get, from the standpoint of the congregation's view of things, that's all that is. Y'all, so too long of a story, but I kind of recommend that.
I think to me that's a good, I think that's a good way to see, you know, what is the practical methodology to keep, I mean, because if none of that works to do, you're going to have to do some type of from the ground up exercise every time.
And doesn't it feel that way sometimes? Oh no, elder selection again. You know, everybody hold on to your seats because we don't know where this is going to go, you know. No, the same form comes out. Yeah. right. You have 2 sermons, and then guys fill out your ballots, you know.
So I'm gonna go, I wanna question, I think that that's really good tools to use. I think that's great. My question is, in the absence of elders, when you're trying to establish elders, I go back to Titus chapter 1 and verse 5 when Paul gives
Titus the instruction.
Yeah, he gives Titus the instruction to set things in order. In the absence of elders and that pipeline growing, who is it the evangelist's responsibility to set that in order going?
Thanks.
Until the eldership is in place.
That could be a great question, depending on whether you agree with my answer or not. Well, first of all, based on Acts 6 and the reading of the text there, we have always distinguished 2 different processes. One is the selection of men. Look out from among yourselves. That's the church's work. Men whom we may appoint over this matter. That's what the apostles were going to do. So I think an evangelist has some role in making sure that there are men appointed, but that's not to say that they're the selector. That has to be a flock thing. So that's, and that's not my answer, but that's my, so start with that assumption. All right, so then the question is not so much who runs the service or who maybe initiates and does the teaching about qualifications. I think we see that. That's what Titus would have done, and Timothy, and Paul himself, I think, in Acts 14, when he goes back through the churches, and what does he do? He selects elders? No. He appoints elders in every place. And I think he's doing that based on what the group, because he's a stranger. He's just wandering through as an evangelist, right? But so then the question becomes, how shall we do the selection? Now, launch off into judgment here, so I don't. But it seems to me that there are spiritual men like Stephanos, like Phoebe, like Timothy and Titus, you would hope, who could manage the process of getting the congregation's feedback into whom they would select, right? Teach about qualifications, whatever. So I'm thinking of men who are like old single guys. They're not going to be elders. They don't have a, what do they say, dog in the fight. You know what I mean? Sorry, go ahead. You're probably going to say something like that. Okay, well, you finished.
I was 24 years old or so when we went through the process here, and the church appointed elders, and I led that charge.
Yeah, interesting.
By myself, and I thought it was going to kill me.
Well, that's probably not a good choice. I mean, you in particular probably, but you know.
Looking back on it, I wish I would have used older men or men who would not have been selected as elders for various
Yeah,
reasons.
right.
And use them more.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
going forward, if it happens, when it happens again, not if, when it happens
Yeah.
again, it will be a not by them, myself approach.
Yeah.
Because that was extremely foolish. I was doing the best I could.
Of course.
with what I had,
Yeah.
which wasn't
No, I think a multiplicity is always helpful in the same way that you have multiple elders, and that's God's plan. But you know, I'm thinking about other significant duties. The churches collected a bunch of money, you know, in Macedonia and Galatia, I think Paul adds that they did. And they selected men. Now, did those men get a title to carry that money with Paul? Well, no, probably not. But that was a significant piece of responsibility. And I'm guessing they trusted them in some matters of judgment to secure the money and make sure it got to the right place, maybe spend it in the right way on their own needs as they traveled. I don't know. You see what I'm saying? But there's a precedent, I think, that we could follow more often, since we are Christians after all, and ought to trust one another, that I say, we as a group want you to take this duty for a short time with this limit, right? But take that on. And I think the whole collecting of the will of a group, you know, how are we selecting these men? I wonder, how big was the church in Jerusalem when they selected those men? It was thousands. How did they figure out who these people wanted to select? Now, maybe they let the Grecian widows choose their favorite, you know, their favorite young men. I don't know, but, you know, I don't know. But anyway, it was a collective thing, and some mechanism was in place to do that, for the will of the group to select the men. But I do not think it is wise, and I'm not sure it's even scriptural, for elders to say, here are the new elders. These are the men, even the men that we think you should kind of evaluate and vote on. That's just not a good plan. Sorry, I know churches do that. And the first thing you know is the elders have put out a list of men that they've already talked to who are willing to serve. If you have any objections, talk to them by next Sunday and we'll have an appointment service. I'm not sure that's really the selection by the congregation. And I've had a man come to me who let's just say he aspired greatly to be an elder. And he said, listen, who in the church should know the sheep better or the members better than the elders? So you guys should be the ones to know who's qualified. If anybody should know, you should know. And the implication being, you know, and he showed up a lot on question 3 for some reason. But, sorry, I mean, just good man, and he did the right thing. And let's see. So it's been an hour and a half, so that's kind of it. So there's all these questions, and they get harder and harder, right? And so if y'all were really an advanced group, we'd get to the hard questions, but we didn't get to that. But I wish you'd just kind of look down through here. And what these are just questions that over time we've had to wrestle with as elders and don't know the answers to a lot of them, right? So I would say thought questions. Well, thought questions are answers that we kind of have some answers to, as you can tell. Number 4 under F, I'm on page 4. Number 4, how important is the public image of an elder? Things like his confidence, his speaking style, his credibility, his perceived humility, his intelligence, integrity. Those are not, except maybe humility, those are not in the list of qualifications. But is it helpful if a man has to lead the flock in a group? Well, yeah, I don't think it is definitely. And I'm sorry to say this, it's probably most helpful for the weaker Christians who don't understand what you really do anyway, right? So those are skills to develop. How could you develop those skills? I think the kind of job you have might have a role in that. Not to mention practice and we'll say this, we should say this many times, we may not because of time, but your wife ought to be just helping you like everything, in every way. Do you realize what you actually said? Or do you understand how you came across? Or I know you don't understand how you came across, but this is what I saw, and this is what I think a lot of the Christians saw when you got up and said that, or something. You know what I mean? Oh man, if you don't have a wife who is comfortable in telling you that kind of stuff.
This is a little more timely than that.
No, I don't want her to yell at me. Never mind.
I know what you were
Yeah, right.
This is what they heard.
Yeah, right. And so that's a preparation. And, I don't know where I could point to in the qualifications, but if you are not managing your marriage so that your wife is not intimidated or she has a whole series of bad events in the past where she's tried to make a suggestion and got smashed for that, you're not preparing. You're not, don't take the work because you're going to need that. And I'll just mention this in passing. Sewell has taught us not to say that an elder steps down, by the way. Y'all can say it. It's not to offend me, but he says that implies that you were stepping up before and you're not greater than any other member. So you resigned. But anyway, I resigned. I didn't have the tools to do the work. And I'm kind of just a fraidy cat anyway. I needed somebody to, build me up. And when things went really bad to say, you every once in a while you really are okay, It's just, kind of helped me build up my spirits. But there are other reasons, but that was the primary thing to me. I'm not sure. I wouldn't quibble over I probably would quibble over the qualification, but about husband and wife or one woman man or whatever. But I would say that that's a tool, and the implication, especially since in 1 Timothy 3, I'm rambling, especially in 1 Timothy 3, it says, and the women also are this way. That suggests a present tense qualification of a wife, maybe just to deacons, but I don't think so, because the Greek word is just women. It's kind of saying, no, that she's a joint worker in this thing. This is a two-person task. At least that's my maybe projection, extrapolation from the text. Okay. 6 is, I could talk about that a long time. What is the wrong criteria? We talked about that a little bit last night, right? People say, well, the church has just gone downhill. And I don't know what they mean, but there's fewer people in the pews or whatever. No, that's really not it. Somehow if we could put our spiritual glasses on and see the growth and maturity, the saving of souls, the avoided temptation, the skillful development, and the proclamation of the word, whether it bore fruit or not. Those are the things. All right, case study is always fun to do. I won't do it, but it just shows you the kind of dilemma and unsolvable problems you have in a flock shepherding thing. But the point of that is really to ask these, or make these points, or ask the questions. Look at page 5, number 2. Is the support of the congregation required for a major move like a new building or something like that? I mean deep support of the congregation. Financial support, moral support, excitement. Yeah, of course it is. And is that a job the elder has to do, to fire people up? This is a great thing. This will help the kingdom to have this new facility, or bring this man in to teach us or whatever. But often we get personally defensive about things and so on. But I will say this, so I'm not going to read all these, but I encourage you to read all these things. And then D, section D, are just a collection of questions that are good questions in the way I defined good questions a while ago, right? I don't know the answers. I can talk about it a little bit. Maybe you know the answers to these things. I have opinions and lean one way or the other. For example, look at number 2 and 3. They're kind of similar. Are some voices in the congregation more credible, worthy to be heard than others? And should some be discounted, right? You want to hear from everybody, don't you? And really, you should be thinking about, how do I get that sheep that's always off inside their head? Oh, that's essential. Probably more essential than listening to the people that are always yelling at you anyway, right? But does that mean I listen to them and they have the most weight in their opinion? They say, you know what, I think a lot of people, in fact, I had a lady tell me this, a lot of the blacks are upset the way they're treated in this church. Somebody told me that, one of our members. Well, how do I handle that? With what credibility do I put into that? You know what I mean? Are there some people whose voices are more credible than others? This isn't a trick question. I think the answer is yes, of course. And why do they meet with the deacons? Of all the people who have spiritually minded, view of things and have maybe touch points, the deacons are kind of like maybe your best group. And so when you do an elder selection or something like that, guess whose forms kind of go on top of the stack? Deacons. Now, is that discrimination? This is what makes it a hard question, right? What if the church found out that you weighted the deacons' opinions, votes, over their votes? Would you be embarrassed about that? Or would you say, no, actually, I believe them. They're more mature. They make better, you know what I mean? I think that, so you got to think about that. So in an issue like selecting elders, or maybe something where you're trying to do a big initiative like these guys now are wrestling with a new building. Right, I need to hear from everybody, but there are some people who just say, I don't want to be a part of a big church. I don't think 700 is too many people if we get a building capacity 700. Well, okay, thanks. It's great to know, and we can talk about that some more, but do you put that like at the top of the stack and say, oh man, the church doesn't want to get to 700? Or you maybe listen to others. And then, kind of a related question, 3, can there be an inner circle of participants in addition to the elders in some congregational decision? Like, might you call the evangelist in, who knows about certain things more than others, right? Or 2 or 3 of the deacons whose expertise is in this area. And these guys have done a great job with that, and actually, I believe, helped the congregation be enthusiastic and joyful about these deacons who are so qualified. They know the people at the county. They understand about the mechanics of what they're trying to do. 5 is important, one that always should be in your mind. When do sheep shepherding problems become flock shepherding concerns, right? And often family entanglements are part of that. It's going to lead to division. There's going to be dissatisfaction. There'll be murmuring. You actually kind of maybe know who the sheep are likely to do that, so you need to be watchful for that. But you know they have. 6 is my favorite. I'm just kidding. Where you just stand up and say, we need to have the kids, not running around after church because they're going to knock some of these old people over and, somehow or another, I guess it's easier just to do it in public, but you don't look right at the parents whose kids are wild. You know what I mean? Of course you don't. Right? The assumption is that one announcement is going to take care of it. Or here, this is actually my favorite. You need to preach on that. Right? Preach on proper dress at church, or preach on as if somehow a sermon, and you know what happens when you preach on something to the people that need to hear it most. They never come. Right? They're not there. I wonder how, we should weight that as opposed to people that we should know by name who know our voice as shepherds and say, I know this is going to be a little difficult, it's hard for me to say this, but let's work on this in a personal level. And you hopefully have enough positive, to use the Covey imagery, positive investments in the bank that you can do the negative withdrawal and help them with that. And then 9, I talked to somebody about this last night, and then I'm going to be done. We'll take a break, and I'm sorry I went over. 9 is one of those, that's a good question, because I don't know. How does modern day phenomenon of church hopping, which I understand happens a little bit around here, I don't know, with churches so close together and convenient and all that, how does that influence the dynamics of congregational decision making? Like if we decide this, several families are going to be out the door because they don't want to do it. That doesn't feel like submission to me, but who knows? That's just me. But.
Sorry. There was somebody else talked about after this preacher over there that when COVID happened, there was a complete reshuffling. Simply based on the
Musical chairs.
yeah.
Yeah.
About how they responded to COVID, and it was a complete reshuffling
Yeah.
of some churches.
Yeah. I'm so sorry that kind of. Well, but that's where we are, and we're a little bit like that in Atlanta. The problem is that Embry Hills keep sucking over exhaling, you know what I mean? So all these other churches are just withering, and once you get some critical mass of young people and kids and good Bible teachers and leaders and decent preachers and all that, then you're kind of like, we're not going to run people off, I don't guess. Have you all considered running people off?
No, but you really want the other churches around you.
Oh, for sure. Help them somehow. Yeah. I'm not sure how you do that and maintain autonomy and all those other things, but still, yeah.
Sound like you're trying to wrap up, but
I am.
got a question along with it.
Thank you.
And it's more, how do you communicate some of these issues? We had last night, had the whole list of congregational issues, we talked about that just a second, and then we got elders and deacons making decisions behind locked doors, and, that kind of thing. So how do you get, we struggle with trying to get this information out to the congregation.
Russ, I told you that he was going to ask that, and I told you that I was going to have you answer it. Didn't I?
Congregation feels
No,
like
but I got one answer.
they have they're part of the decision.
Yep. Feel heard. Feel like they have, that their interests were deeply considered and all that. And yeah, right. So talk about some mechanisms, Russ.
Some of it is structured, that we had a few congregational meetings every one around the beginning of the year, one like late summer or so, when everybody's getting back. And so we lay out an agenda of things that are really important to communicate to the congregation. Maybe some of those things off those lists we talked about. We make sure everybody has a feedback form, either in their hands or, here's where, it's up on the screen on every single slide, email here, and you add comments, thoughts, questions.
And the paper form is organized by the same agenda, right? So if they're talking about the building thing, or they're talking about the budget, or they're talking about attendance issues, or the schedule for the year, the form itself will have those headings, so you know where to write that feedback.
We try to find other opportunities too. So an elder closes out every service. And we'll talk about in our meeting, hey, when you close out tomorrow or 2 weeks from now, make sure that you re-announce so-and-so. You talk about the importance of this upcoming event, or how important it is for us to all be engaged in this activity that the Spanish-speaking members are going to be at. It's something that's unusual gathered a group that had some concerns about the building expansion thing. 2 years after we had started some of the process, and some of their comments and things were exactly the opposite of what I remember saying in front of everybody. And then you just realize you just have to keep doing it. How well do people listen or not?
And remember.
And remember, so we made an announcement about our next step related to the building, and I only took about 10 minutes to do it. But everything I said had a detailed bullet point on the screen, which I wouldn't normally do. I think that's distracting as a preacher to have every detail. But I thought in this case, I don't want you necessarily trying to remember what I said. It's right there on the screen. If you only read the screen, you would have gathered what.
So what are the ways in which people can give feedback and feel heard? So the email site, the Survey Monkey stuff you've done, but you don't have a plenary. I know that in the past we've broken into groups. People that really care about evangelism go in this classroom. People that are interested in the worship and the management go in there, the classes, and then the building facilities. So the group could kind of go to the areas where they had the most interest, and in a smaller setting, more manageable for sure than just a plenary session, could actually discuss, make recommendations. Somebody keep notes, that kind of. You haven't done that in a while, but it was.
The reason why those tended to become ones where you get a group of 40 together about a particular topic and you had an hour devoted to it. Well, 2 people would be the loudest voices.
Not always the wisest, but the loudest.
Not always the wisest, and so was it really productive and all? I don't know that we ever get all of this stuff. The more disappointing thing, frankly, over the last few years has been there isn't that much feedback that comes back. A lot less than you would think. And you can pat yourself on the back and say, well, they're just really happy with everything we're doing. But I wonder if that's not sometimes a sign of either apathy or it's shallow. Our members are not as deeply spiritually concerned about what's happening to the degree that they should be, that they're questioning our decision. Hey, what about this? Could we do that? Or I'm not sure I understand the rationale. I think it's good when they come up and ask some of those questions, because how do we know otherwise? The one other thing we do, it is by the time we take a break, when we have new people come and place membership, especially those who've been there for, let's say, 3, 4, 6 months before they decide to place membership, that's a gold mine of information. Why here? What did you see? What's different from somewhere else? What did you think about this? Because these are fresh eyes looking at and able to tell us something that I thought everybody was used to, everybody understood, but they're like, we don't know this. Oh, yeah, we haven't talked about that in 5 years. So I think that's a real source of information to somebody. But you have some thoughts here about something new.
In addition, you're also setting a tone that says we really want to hear what you think about stuff in the very beginning of it.
How you respond to some of that.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. We have to respond back.
Yeah,
There's no way
yeah.
they know they've been heard.
And here's one of the harder things with like multiple elders here. I think this is true, 2, 3, 10, doesn't matter. We get an email from somebody who has a question, a thought, whatever it is, and they send it to the elders. I always feel like it's like a ticking time bomb sitting there, like somebody's got to respond to that. I don't think it's me. I think it probably ought to be Barry, or Larry hasn't responded to one in a while. So we finally realized this is a bad idea. So we do have Elder of the Month. Somebody has a responsibility for certain things, and that's one of them. But sometimes you just kind of know, hey, I'm the person who knows the most about that subject. Respond right away, because I've told people who felt like I didn't get, nobody responded. The only thing you can do is send something to 10 people who all look around thinking, well, somebody will answer that question.
I'm not going to make my speech. I could almost get tearful about it. I love the deacons meeting. I mean, one day I was elder of the month, and I just went in there, and I looked across the room, and there's like 30 people in there, evangelists, right? And it just dawned on me. I remember being in a church back when I was teaching, just out of college, where there were about this many men in a men's meeting. Y'all know where I'm going with this, right? And that was one of the more miserable experiences, that I had to endure every month as a Christian, fairly new, immature Christian. And I looked at that room and I thought, this looks just like that meeting, but it is absolutely different. It's night and day. And why is that? I asked myself, why? Why is it different? They're just as zealous. Men in that men's meeting years before were good people. They weren't any less Christians. You know what I mean? What was the difference? And I finally decided it's because those men had adopted the model of submission to authority joyfully. And we all trusted each other for whatever reason. And it was just like, I just think about it. It's jovial. It's down to business. We can talk about serious, spiritual, deep things, hard things. Do we want to arm our ushers so that we can take out shooters that come in the building? When do we lock the... things that are tough. We can talk about it. But somebody will bring up a Bible principle, almost inevitably. Why is that meeting so much better? And I have to think it has to do with adopting God's model of an authority structure that is populated by good hearts. I think that's the reason. I forget where I was going. Oh, yes, I wanted to say this. Another, I think, essential element is that the deacons are that conduit that you're talking about. They do represent a larger group, a much larger group of the congregation. They also can be your radio system, right? So you explain it to the deacons and they're all nodding and they're spiritually minded enough to know that I'm not going to go out and fight the elder's decision or murmur about what they've said or done. And so they become your advocates too. Now, can I find that in the scripture? I don't know, but it just seemed like their character would lend itself to doing that very thing if you look at the qualifications. So I just think the role of deacons is the deacons themselves, properly qualified, are just a golden asset. I don't even see how you could do the spiritual work without that. Okay, I'm sorry, I've worn y'all out. Let's go. And one of the things, it took us several sessions to discover this secret, really a kind of an amazing piece of wisdom. I don't know why I didn't think of it, but we did several of these sessions before we discovered that you can use the women's restroom. Just don't make a mess.
know that the turn off the lights is a universal way of getting people to. Yeah, it works amazingly well at different places. And they wonder why it happens so often too. Almost every service, there seems to be that electrical surge. I've struggled to try to think about how to kind of kick off this part of it this morning. If you listen carefully to the way Marty described how we got started doing some of this, if you added it up, 6 sessions, an hour and a half each time, that's about 9 hours, and we're trying to compress 9 hours of thought into 3, but it's really worse than that, because the more you go off and do some of these things, the more extra stuff you think of. And we should talk about this and think about that. So we can do a lot more even than 9 hours. So where's our time kind of best served? I'm comforted with the idea that a lot of you will come back tonight. It's at your house, right, Steve? Yeah. And we can have an informal sit down. You can ask questions. So maybe some things that we don't really cover as well will happen then. But I wanted to take just a couple of minutes to try to know a little bit more about your association and your comfort level with elders. And I don't know the best way to gauge this, but one thought is to kind of ask you, how many of you are not members here at Trustville? Is anybody who's not? Okay. Well, but you've moved here recently. You're worshiping here, but not a member. Where are you?
Springville, about 20 miles.
Okay. I know Springville. I had a great aunt who lived up in Springville. So, okay. But everybody else is here, right? And there were elders at Trustville for a long period of time until last couple of years or so, is my understanding. So you've worked with elders here. How many of you have worshiped somewhere else where there were elders at some point in your past? That's a lot. That's quite a number. And I've heard a couple of your stories. So some of you may have heard or know that Bryant's dad, Jimmy, and I were in college together. And so we got lots of college stories and going to Bama games and stuff like that. But frankly, it's a really gratifying thing to know that we both live in Atlanta, and his dad is an elder at Powers Ferry, and I think the world of his family. So you're the son of an elder, and you're the son of an elder, right? Aaron, you're the son of an elder. Anybody else had a father or grandfather who served as an elder? Anybody else besides those 3? Okay, but a little bit of that kind of, yeah. My wife is the daughter of Hiram Hutto, who I found out actually worked. I think his first work was in Trustville. She was telling me that. I didn't realize that. I'd forgotten that fact. And so she knew all about what it was like to be a preacher's daughter and to kind of be out there in front of everybody as part of the family. I think that's part of the dynamics we might talk about some tonight too, being the children of elders and a perspective of how it might affect your children and all. But it sounds to me like you have a pretty good level of experience and hopefully a comfort level about working with, or even some of you have served as elders, and so you know what's there. So part of my mission in talking about sheep shepherding is to do 2 things. One is to convince you that you can do it. Now, I know not all of you maybe are qualified or will be qualified according to Titus 1 and 1 Timothy 3, but to the extent to which you may very well be qualified at some point in the future, I want you to see and have a vision that you can do the work that we're about to describe. But I also want to convince you that you're really needed for that work. And the second part of that is a little bit dicey. Because in convincing you of the importance of the work, you have to kind of expose you to just how hard it is. And that sometimes causes men to think, not me. I don't, you know, that. I don't see myself ever being in that situation and having that kind of conversation or doing that sort of work. When we were starting off these discussions, most of what I'm telling you here about the sheep shepherding part, lesson 4 out of the 6, and I had the clever idea of starting that morning. That was one of the days that I was assigned to teach. And so I just asked the group, I was like, excited. We had this first group of 6 men in there, and like, what are you learning so far? What have you gained in our, because, we spent 4.5 hours together. And one of an elder, he raised his hand, he goes, I've learned, I have no idea why anybody would desire this work. Oh, I don't think we're accomplishing our mission here. Or purpose of this class, because it is hard. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I want to go, if you think about the issues that we sometimes have to deal with, and I'm going to actually jump to part L on page 12 here and kind of go through that. In just a second, I got one more question I want to do first, but before we go there. But that list there is going to be really the difficult kind of thing. So I just want you to think for a moment. In trying to deal with that question, I got to thinking about, well, what are the benefits to the elder? There has to be some. I mean, servant role, it is at times a burden, but there has to be something that's valuable. I'd say the same thing about, Aaron's an evangelist and preacher. It's a servant role. There's got to be some reason why you're doing this voluntarily, Aaron, right? I mean, there has to be some benefit and value to you that causes you to want to do that work. So what do you think, an elder? What does an elder get out of the work? Got any guesses of the blessings maybe that maybe you got some thoughts about your dads who did it? Isn't there some real deep satisfaction of feeling like what you're doing is you're serving the Lord in this? And it's a reminder that that's what you're doing. I spend so much of my day at my work and with people who don't necessarily know God, and to have an opportunity to know that a significant part of my time is really doing the Lord's work, that's helpful to me. What else? Can you think of other blessings?
With God's help and the way He sets forth that plant to grow,
Yeah.
I kind of help do that same type of thing with spiritual growth and being a leader and leading others to Christ too. There's got to be some
Yeah.
gratification there.
I'll get emotional if I describe that too much, but that's exactly right. There are a few that Marty talked about confidentiality. There are a few members that had issues that were shared with maybe only 1 or 2 elders, or maybe just Kay and myself, and they got through whatever was their difficult time period. And to watch them with their families to grow, and nobody else knows what that was, and they're past it, is extremely meaningful. But as I said, it's a hard work. On the other hand, I think of those that showed up in a broken state, and we worked really hard, and I almost feel like you've watched the plant wither away. And what did I not say? What should I have done? But there is definitely, to be able to look around a congregation of our size and see a number of people that, in some way or another, you had something to do with it was helpful. Somebody raised yes.
It's in some ways similar to some advice an older evangelist gave me when I first started. He told me to tuck every encouraging note, letter,
Wow.
anything you get along those lines, tuck it in a folder. Read it first, be thankful for it, appreciate it in the moment, tuck it in a folder. He said, don't open that folder, because there's going to come a day when you're going to want to quit preaching. You're just going to get so overwhelmed, so discouraged. He says, that's when you open the folder, and you're reminded of why you're doing what you're
Yeah.
now in a way, and those little things are the ones, the things you hold on to. There's going to be a lot of discouraging things. I think it would apply for encouragement.
It absolutely does, and it's back to the idea of, we're supposed to water, God will give the increase. And if you really truly believe that, have confidence in it, that the Word will have an impact in people's life. Marty did a good job last night of describing how much of the work, and you could see that in a list of passages, those action words, had something to do with being engaged with the Word to get that out. If you're confident that it will do it, then eventually in your work as an elder, you will see some fruits of how that Word has taken root in somebody's life and helped to change. And that is a very gratifying thing. But one of the things you mentioned, the notes that people had written to you as an evangelist. Well, here's another advantage or blessing. There was no question, in the first year that I served as an elder, my name had been mentioned specifically in a public prayer more times than all the rest of my life combined up to that moment in time. I mean, the congregation is wonderful about prayer. Now, we got to the number that sometimes now it's a little bit more of, pray for the elders, but they were very frequently praying for Marty and Russ and Paul and Ken and just hearing that sobered you up. So that's a great blessing. Anything else? I got a couple more. Try to jump into some of this idea of being.
Recognizing the wisdom of God's plan and how important it is and how we help us
Yeah. Well, right.
Ours have gotten really good, but it would be better to not have.
Fortunately, by the time I became an elder, it had been about 22 years since I'd ever been to a men's meeting. So I didn't feel that one so much, but I can see that would be a great sense of relief and all. Here are a couple of others. You mentioned something about being engaged, I think it's Steve, in the Lord's work. It's kind of a constant awareness of that. It's so easy to get distracted with our other activities and things, but what happens as an elder is I get a text message in the middle of the day from somebody in need, or another elder or something. It may be not really that big of a deal or important, but it's some connection back to, don't forget who you are and what you're supposed to be doing and what matters the most. And you get that message to you far more often than you would not. I think that's a good thing, to be made aware of that. And it's caught me at times when maybe I was, not necessarily with the spirit that I have and whatever was going on, frustration, maybe even, who knows. But that's a good thing. I think it's strengthened my marriage. And I think especially at my age, I've passed 60 now, and the kids are grown, and for the most part, we still have very close and connections with them. But couples get to this age sometimes, and they're close. Favorite sitcom watch, and they don't really know exactly what are we going to do next. Well, Kay and I get caught up in a lot of deep spiritual conversations that would not happen if I were not an elder. They should. I wouldn't be good about initiating and doing that, but we have to. There's things going on that force us into thinking about God's people and His work. And that binds the two of us together and benefits. So, again, if it's possible in your future, this work is needed. Let me show you some reasons why. So turn over then to, I got like one set of notes with types of page numbers, so I'm depending on y'all. If you ever feel lost, if you don't do that anywhere on my page. Down under L, under these hard cases and all, think about some of these kinds of things that you'll find along the way. Here's a man, a successful person. He's always in charge in his life in other ways. He's got strong ideas for what the church ought to do. But to him, you realize that his focus is more than about. I think about couples where they're struggling in their marriage, and the one who is apparently the most knowledgeable about the scriptures and all, really her perspective, she doesn't understand how worldly her perspective is. And so what are you going to do about that? How are you going to kind of manage to help them when she doesn't see the things that clearly? Here is someone, it says, that is a vocal and cynical number 5, single woman, has increasing influence over several of the other women. And so what, is this a case of false teaching? Or how are you going to address her? How are you going to address the ones that maybe she's having some influence with? That's a really difficult thing. How are we going to deal with that particular individual? A semi-new convert whose background in the world is long and deep, struggling with many bad habits, and others around her are maybe, uncomfortable because her background was so immoral or just out of step with the way we think a woman should behave herself, and yet she's trying to follow the Lord. How does she help her to build relationships? How do you give her advice? Is there a point at which you should go to some others who maybe are being too critical or too gossiping about it? And how do you address that? You can just think about all these different individual circumstances. Look at number 9. A lonely, immature Christian seems to use the elders' counseling as her companionship. And not in a bad way, but just a time-consuming. Think about it. As a result, she's always in an emotional crisis of some sort, kind of eating up the elder's time, or the elder and his wife's time. What do you do about that? How do you handle that situation? Just under a few of these, the reality is you probably know a much deeper, longer list. Think about those Christians and all of the bad decisions that they make and the consequences that flow out of that. Think about those weak Christians who are hurt by somebody else. It's not just about the bad decisions you make. It's about the bad decisions, the simple decisions that the people around you make that discourage you and pull you down or pull you towards some kind of worldly activity you should not be involved in. Marriages sometimes suffer because both parties are doing the wrong thing. One is doing everything they can to do the right thing. How do you, as a shepherd, help those individuals? So let's go back to the first page of this. I'm going to skip down over some of these various duties here, and I'm going to try to go to page 9 to see in some of the examples of service, because here's what I want you to think of. I mean, I say I'm going to skip over it, but just very briefly, if you look at page 8, here's another one of those job descriptions, as Marty put it. Here are the kind of things that, as a shepherd of the sheep, that you're going to be involved in doing. But what are the kinds of situations that you get in, and where are you going to look for advice and help in dealing with it? So, I want y'all to ask questions like you did for Marty. It was very helpful. So the first person who comes up with a good or great question is going to be highly appreciated. I don't know what your family, work, social circumstance is. But most of us, and I think men in particular, don't end up in situations where we would say, you know what, I'm really comfortable with. I love those one-on-one situations where I need to tell somebody they're not really doing the best thing. And just share my heart with them. I love it when somebody comes and just dumps their problems on me, and I'm challenged to come up with a good answer for how they can turn this thing around. Now, if any of you feel like, oh, that's my favorite thing, I don't know what he's talking about. Most of us, I don't think, really feel kind of up to that. And I suspect that really we're never going to feel completely there. Marty talks about it as being like, he's always felt as a child trying to do a man's job in this role. Those are your words. But somebody's got to do this. I mean, the need is just, and I think that most of us are much, much more capable of doing this than we realize. And at the end, I'm going to try to tell you a little bit about in your role as a father or husband or fulfilling the picture of Galatians 6:1. You've already been training yourself in different ways to do what we're talking about, but I admit that it's hard. So where would you go to find some examples of that? It is a blessing to work with other elders. It's a blessing to kind of step into an existing eldership. Y'all have figured out Marty is the older one, right? I'm the young guy. I remember being the young elder, the junior elder kind of thing, and I'm still trying to figure out how I'm the second oldest elder. I just cannot figure that out. See? That's just the unfairness of the world. You know, the world's not fair. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, but anyway, despite the fact he's only a few years older, it was wonderful to step in and learn things from somebody who's already serving as an elder. One of the challenges here, of course, would be if you get an eldership again. It's almost like everybody's on the same, starting over. If Steve were to serve again, or so forth, you might have some experience there, but not that ability to kind of lean on each other. Where do you go? I'd suggest that the scriptures offer us two examples of those who are dealing particularly with individuals, sheep shepherding type of circumstances, and the first one is Christ. And so in this lesson sheet on page 9, you've got some of these examples. We talked last night about John chapter 10. I hope you already realize what made Christ the Good Shepherd. He knew the individuals by name. They knew him. They knew his voice. There was that relationship that we talked about that's been formed along the way. But look at part D. I'm going to depend on y'all to kind of know these stories. You know your Bible. If you're willing to come on a Saturday morning and do this with us, surely you know collectively some of these stories. Yeah, I'm sorry, C1D on page 9 under Jesus Christ. Everybody found that? All right, so here's a list of stories. What I like about these is that in the recounting of the Gospels, sometimes Jesus is teaching the 5,000, and so you get or Sermon on the Mount. You get his lessons to the Mount. But there's these touching kind of scenes where one person, he's dealing one-on-one. That's this idea of the sheep shepherding thing. Let's think about some of the things that Jesus offered to these individuals as he served as the chief shepherd. Now I'm trying to think in my own humble, overwhelming, overwhelmed way, what can I emulate about that? So here are a couple of these. The rich young ruler. You remember him coming and all? What would you say that Jesus gave that man? In that encounter, in that discussion, what did he give him that man needed? He gave him constructive criticism.
He gave him positive affirmations that the really told him, these are the things that I am.
Yes.
He said, yes, you are. And he loved him for that, but then turned around and said, then he gave him constructive criticism.
Did it work? I mean, if you think in terms of what we sometimes say is the success, did the group grow? Did he start Did he do what Jesus told him? I guess that's no, he didn't. No, that's an interesting point. I personally am convinced that eventually this man did do it. I think that when Jesus was raised from the dead and was resurrected, he'd be the perfect candidate to believe that actually happened. And if he was, and he was there in Jerusalem, he would have been one of those who would have sold things in order to give to those that were poor there, and kind of ended up doing it anyway. But that's just me. I like to think of the optimistic, what happened way later kind of circumstance. But he needed to hear something. Was it what that man wanted to hear? Absolutely not. And sometimes you just have to still your heart, recognize this individual, they've got to hear the truth. This is what the Word says. This is the change that they need to make. The manner in which you say it matters. You pointed out, I think Jesus loved him. That one of the accounts, there are multiple accounts of this, mentions the fact that Jesus loved him. He cared for him. He wanted him to do the right thing, but it was up to the man to do it. And I don't control all of that. When I have these discussions with individual sheep, I don't have to be the one that makes the decision. It breaks my heart to watch them do something and I just don't. Why aren't you doing what we're advising you to do? But that's what he got. Thank you. What about this demonic? You remember that story? A man in the tombs. And, he's not in his right mind. He's got the legion of demons and all. And Jesus heals him. But what else does he do for him? Beyond healing him, you remember how that story ends? What did that man want to do? Wanted to go with Jesus. I think if I'd been him, I'd still be clinging to his knees as he's trying to get into the boat, right? But he doesn't get to go. What does Jesus tell him? He redirects him. That's the way he put it. He gives him a focus and a direction. He told him to go do what? Tell others what had happened to him. And it appears, it's hard to say this with certainty, but it appears that when Jesus comes back into that area later, there is a much greater reception for him. Perhaps because this man did do what Jesus had asked him to do. He just told people his story and what had happened to him. But he had work to do. And I think that's part of an elder's task with sheep is to figure out, this is what you're capable of doing. You can do this. You know, yeah, you're nervous about, but you could help in these children's classes. You could help to teach this. Here's a mentor who could help you to do this. You can be engaged. You can overcome this. Whatever it is to give them confidence that they can do it. And he gave him a task, and this man went and did it. What about the woman with an issue of blood? Remember that story? Yeah, Jesus has returned to Capernaum. And he is traveling across the city in a great crowd of people because he's trying to get over to Jairus' house, whose daughter is going to die as they're going. And what happens? What's this woman do? Touches him. Touches really just like his garment. And Jesus stops and says, hey, who touched me? That confused everybody. But what did he give her? You ever thought about that? I mean, he healed her, but that's just part of this picture is the healing. What did he give her that was so important? Love and attention. You see that? That in the middle of this crowd, everybody else is like, look, why are we stopping? And I'm impressed by Jairus, who Jesus kind of tells him, look, almost like, trust me here, and all as the story progresses past this. But with her, he gave her time and attention. One of the things I've learned from Marty is we'll be standing in the back and people are wandering out after services are over. And you know how the routine works, right? How you doing? Good, good. Well, you know what that is. That's not actually a conversation. It sounds like a conversation. It sounds like we just learned something about each other. No. That's just our friendly way, good Southern way of saying hi. And hi back. That's all that means. They could be in the worst day of their whole life. But if you ask somebody, how you doing? It's usually, I'm okay. How's your day going? Yeah, okay, yeah. So Marty will go, sometimes he won't let go of the hand. He'll shake it a little bit longer and go, no. How are you really doing? And you'd be surprised the answers that you get at times. Elders are busy. We're busy in our jobs, our families, and other things, but figuring out some way or another, carving out enough time, and figuring out the person who really needs the attention is so important. And I think Jesus gives us a great example of being able to do this. We won't go through the story about the children, but do you think that an elder is responsible for knowing about the little kids, the 5-year-olds, the 8-year-olds that are running around the building and stuff. Do you think an elder ought to know them and have some relationship with them? Well, I don't understand. I thought the role of elders was like dealing with the flock and the sheep, which really means those who are Christians. And the 5-year-olds haven't been converted yet, right? So why would he care about the 8, 9, and 10-year-olds and others? They're the future. And here's this example of Christ. You know, his apostles kind of had the attitude I'm trying to falsely portray, that they're not important, that's not the work. But Jesus thought they were. He welcomed them. And I think good elders spend time with little kids. Sit down with them, learn their story. It's one of the things that's really weighing on my conscience these days. I could name every kid's name for the longest time. I'm struggling with that right now. Partially because my kids are older. When they were in those midst of those, it's like, well, I knew everybody's name because they were the friends of this person and the friends, you know, it just fit together more. But I think that's part of the responsibility of the elder. I need to know those kids. And some of my favorite conversations right now. We have a young woman who, a single woman who became a member because of some homeless woman who started worshiping with us, who helped her to learn the gospel. And this single mom who's got 3 kids from 2 different men, has never been married. She is the most wonderful Christian. I don't know how much this is recorded, so but hopefully I'm keeping enough anonymity here. But if you met her 3 kids, you would be astonished at their godliness, their concern, their respect, and in situations that people don't anticipate that that's the case. I love to sit down with those kids. And everybody needs to have those kinds of association with the children. As you said, they're the future, but they're also part of our work, I believe, as elders. That's great. So I never thought we should have that down. You got to add that to the whole. That's yeah. No, that really is good. The widow of Nain. I think again, it's a little bit about the spending time. My view of that story is that what's described right before that, Jesus is nowhere near Nain and ends up the next day right there in that city. I think it's because he anticipated the need of that woman. Now that's, you know, the divine anticipation. But, I mean, we're smart men. We should be able sometimes to look at circumstances and anticipate where a need is coming up and be there at the right moment when it happens. And I think that's what Jesus gave for this woman. For Martha, I think the lesson with Martha is this. You remember what Martha and Mary, her sister also, they both said the same thing to Jesus when he showed up after Lazarus had died. Remember what they said? Yes, go ahead. If you'd been here. Yeah, if you had been here, what? He would not have died. He would have been here. Does that not sound like some criticism there? That's not the way Jesus responds to it. I think that there's no question they're devoted to him. They speak about him as being the Lord and all of that. But there is still this element there. So elders need, in these situations, be careful. You're going to hear some things, you know, there'll be some criticism at time, or I could interpret what you said in a way and be very defensive and all. Don't do that. Strive very hard not to allow that to happen. And Jesus certainly did not do it there.
Really windy people tend to lash out at others irrationally. It's when they're under. If they're struggling, I mean, there's often lost their love. And in almost any tragedy, you want to kind of blame someone or reach out or something. That's what she's doing. And really, if you don't have the strength to see through that, or to take the criticism or the implied neglect, or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think it is the case. Often people who are struggling a lot, they'll be lashing out at everything. In a way, somehow reflecting blame themselves or their family. The church is letting down. The elders don't care about all of them.
Very good.
I think it's one thing, just generally speaking, both in congregational matters and law matters, you have to be overly sensitive, but you can't be sensitive. You're a great listener, you sense the mood, you can see beyond the words, more people listen, but at the same time, there's a stability that comes from, I'm just doing the right thing, doing this. And he's not.
Yeah, right.
In fact, I think there's even a step beyond that, I don't think I've ever gotten there. But, so I had an elder about recently at church and stuff, and some members left, they were angry over decision about the preacher. That's never happened before, I'm sure, but, you know, they left, and one of the members reached out to him and said, well, no, we're not leaving you guys, we're withdrawing ourselves from the eldership. What all is wrong with that statement? Where do you begin? And he was asking me, he says, you know, we heard that, and we need to write a letter to the church where they are, and we need to talk to them. No, none of that. They're just lashing. And yes, it's an unscriptural sense, but what are you trying to do? Make them look bad? Is that what you're doing? And it seemed to me that there are situations the elders are in, they are blessed, although it's hard to think this way, when they are suffering on behalf of the flock. It's unjust. That's never happened before. Somebody suffered unjustly for something. You understand what I mean? I think there are situations where you want to be defensive, right? You know it's unjust, right? When your kids go for milk, and guess who gets it? That's a simple case. But I wonder if we're maybe not more sharing in the suffering of Christ in Paul's presence, when we're actually dealing with the imperfection of the sheep and taking it joyfully, even if
That's very, very good. Aaron?
I was just saying, just based on what he just said, thinking back to a year and a half ago, so years back, I feel like that's where the elders and the preachers almost, they have to have church back.
Yes.
You know, there were times, and maybe it was wrong, there were times that I dealt with criticism of the elders so that they would have to go to meetings. Because somebody's going to come as a preacher because they're more comfortable with me, I deal with it. And I'm sure there were times they had to deal with criticism of me that maybe was unfair or bad. You know, maybe they would come to me and say, hey, let's work on this. And I never think this way, you're having that problem. You gotta have it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And we talk about elders closing out a service. You know, that's an opportunity, especially if the errands of wherever they are have preached a really difficult lesson, maybe something that was needed but was difficult for people to hear. Well, an elder should stand up and endorse that and say that was a good lesson. This is why we needed that kind of lesson and not leave them kind of hanging out there on it. But we've also found our evangelists have often helped. Your question about communication and things, here they are frequently also in front of the congregation, and they filled in some of those gaps sometimes because we've talked about it and they kind of know. They know the congregation. I'm not sure they're following quite what's going on over here that the elders want them to know, and they've done a good job of kind of filling those sorts of things in. That's cool. I want to say a few things about Paul, but any questions so far? Anything, comments or extra thoughts, particularly out of this? You probably have other stories you can think of out of the life of Christ where he's dealing with an individual. The things he does with Peter are just remarkable to me and very meaningful. All right, so here's Paul, Acts chapter 20. That was, if you were here last night, you know that some of that was discussed as well. I was thinking this morning about this material and all. I probably should go back and spend some time thinking about some of Paul's interaction with individuals. There are some of those, just the way that he inspires the Timothys and Tituses and others and the things that they should do. But there are stories that are there. But Acts 20 is wonderful because he's talking to elders and he's saying, look, follow my example. And here's some things that he does that I think are especially important about sheep shepherding, the individuals. I think about they were to remember out of his work, for example, this is the first bullet point question under 2A under Paul on page 9. They were to remember in verse 18 and 19 his humility, his tears and trial. Verse 24 actually talks about his attitude. I do not account my life of any value, nor as precious to myself, if only I may finish my course in the ministry that I received from the Lord to testify to the gospel of the grace of God. Think about that. Well, if only that could be the description of the spirit and attitude of Russ. As an elder, as a Christian, as a father, if that would be my attitude, that really I don't account my life of any value or precious to myself. What really matters is, what am I doing in regard to the Word of God? That would be wonderful. But the humility and the tears, do you notice the word tears? Look at verse 31. What was he doing in terms of his warning with them? He admonished everyone how? Very end of verse 31. With tears. Do you see the kind of the emotions and things? And I'll just tell you, I think sometimes, in fact, my worry these days, I've shared this. Kay said, man, you can't tell people that. So, well, this is the truth. My worry sometimes these days is that I've done some of this kind of work to an extent for so long that I don't feel as compassionate and as emotional as I did at the beginning. I mean, some of it is a little bit of that weariness that we're warned. Do not grow weary in doing good work. Okay, well, that's a good warning to me, because I find times when I am growing weary in doing some of those good things. But a good elder needs to understand, as tough as we may like to be as men, you're going to shed some tears. There are going to be some really difficult times if you properly care enough about the people that you're trying to help. And I think that's what Paul is trying to describe to them. For 3 years he'd been with them. He loved them. He cared for them. He wanted them to change their life and to be transformed through the power of the Spirit to truly know God. And to the extent that wasn't happening, well, he wept over it. And so that kind of concern, don't hold it back. Be sure that you're willing to suffer in that kind of emotional way. But did you notice where he did the work? Actually, bullet point 2 just kind of tells you that, where he did it. I'll ask you in a minute what he was doing. But where did he do his work? Where did Paul do his work? House to house and publicly. But that means that I need to figure out a way to get into the homes and into the lives of those that I'm going to serve as an elder. I think that one of the reasons for that, the hospitality part as a qualification of elders, is this willingness to share what you have, but actually to spend time with people. Nothing's more effective. I've found, maybe you know something better, I think nothing's more effective to figuring out who a person is and what's going on in their life than to share a meal with them and start asking some open-ended kind of questions that they don't always know that's kind of where we're going. And maybe that's not even my intention. I've learned a lot of stuff. I wasn't trying to learn it. I just was with somebody, and they started opening up and talking about things.
So it makes me think of the way I feel about evangelism. Not talking about their role in the evangelist, but in terms of Christians being evangelists, if we're going to convert people, we have to. It's more than likely not going to be in a public forum.
Right.
We have to have that individual relationship with people to be able to share the gospel with them, to get them to the public forum, because then they'll be comfortable with us that we've already shared the gospel, and then they'll be understanding what's going on in the public forum. Same thing in relation to the eldership sheep relationship. I can see that type of comparativeness here in between an evangelistic effort to convert someone and then also the elder with sheep relationship.
Yeah, great.
One-on-one type.
Great comment. I think there is definitely that kind of connection. Other thoughts, comments? Yeah, yes, sir.
The difficult thing to do is you gotta learn when to read the talk and shut up.
Yes.
That's very difficult.
I'm terrible about that at times. You know? And I will say, back to because we need to weave this in as best we can, the role of your wife in doing this. And so Sometimes the difficult conversations that we need to have are ones that Kay and I will do together. And just, as an aside, half the work that you're going to do in any church is going to be serving the female sheep. It's the women. And, our kind of personal rule, but I think every elder I've ever served with has followed this. I'm not going to meet with a woman one-to-one, just us. Now, I might, pull her aside in the foyer at the building, and I'll have a one-to-one conversation, but I'm not going to go back in the back and close the door and have a sit-down private kind of meeting. And on a lot of these very, very personal kinds of issues and things, I'm going to carry Kay along with me. And she gets pulled into lots of other ones. But what she's good about is pointing out those things to make me listen. Because I'll jump right in and start talking. Or, and I meant to bring this today, but we didn't come in my car. So just real quickly, when I first started serving with Marty has a red book that he had that is like a memo. It's just pages, right? Just blank pages. And he made notes. Almost every meeting, when we sat down with somebody, he made notes about me. We'd meet a new member, and they would tell their life story and stuff. He'd write down notes. And I kind of did it on notepads and stuff for a long time, but notepads, pages can get torn off. You can use it for other things, and I've got some of those kind of filed away somewhere. But a few years back, someone I helped to find a job somewhere gave me as a gift. It was a 8.5 by 11, not your little bitty one. It was 8.5 by 11. It was black. It was a little more respectful looking than the bright red that Marty had, and all. And I'm looking, I think, what am I going to do with this? This is just a better version of the Marty book. And so when I sit down and talk to somebody, I tend to take notes. I want to remember what they said. I want to remember when somebody placed membership and something about their story that will help me remember later. I want to write down their name because that's about the only way I can ever remember a name. But Kay, when I start to do that, think about a one-on-one emotional conversation, and I'm over there. All right, tell me what's going on. There's something about that seems a little off-putting, doesn't it? And she always points it out. Don't worry about it. He does that all the time, or something to diffuse it and to help me stop and listen. But the skill of listening is incredibly important, as I've just rambled on and on. What else? Give me another comment so I can show you how good I am at listening. Yeah. I think that's the most important thing that's been said all morning, at least of my stuff. You might have said something more important, Marty, I don't know. But I think that recognizing that I'm going to give some hard advice, I'm going to be here, I'm here to help, and everything, but it's going to have to be, whatever I tell them at the end of the day, it's got to be the message that God wants them to hear out of His Word. And what it also means, though, is that there's some people that I just cannot help. You would think you could. Like, Marty has had people out of the world, not Christians, come at times and ask him if he would help them with their marriage because they've kind of learned or heard that he's done a lot of marriage counseling. He can't help them at all. because they don't have a common viewpoint of what rules a marriage is what God has said about the relationship of men and women in marriage. If they don't have that belief, and we'll open up the scriptures so you can learn about self-sacrifice and humility and all those things that you think, well, what's that got to do with marriage? That's the heart of it right here in the scriptures. You can't help them. And Steve is exactly right. And I think that's been part of the challenge of all these difficult circumstances. And if you had my little black book, what you would find in it, there are some situations in there that I would never believe people actually did these things and got themselves into those circumstances. And I think, what am I going to tell them? And so you got to spend time in the Word. What's the passage that might touch their heart? What's the piece of advice that will be consistent with what God has said? I'm going to talk a minute about some doctrinal issues, but that too is one where I got to figure this out. How do I convince them from the Word that they're on the wrong path here? Oh, that's a great comment. Yeah, go ahead, and then I'll go back. No, you finish out your thought. No. Yeah. No, and I'll add something kind of interesting about that. My daughter is a social worker, and she has qualifications as a counselor, and she counsels some troubled teens. And it's remarkable to me because I love Rachel to death, and I think that she has gained a lot of wisdom, especially in the last 5 years or so. She's 30 years old, and what it would take to necessarily be that qualified person is a lot less than you may think that it is. I don't know where you're going, Steve, I'll come back. I think that sometimes we dismiss our ability to do counseling because we don't understand what people really just simply need to know is, where are you, what's going on, and what do you need to do, and motivate them. And all that's kind of based back to the Word. What were you going to say in addition to that? I got one more point about counseling, but... Oh. I decided long ago, I decided this in work and then carried it into being an elder. I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm going to do my best to make sure that it's the legal thing, but I'm going to start with, I'm going to do the right thing. And so if somebody needs counseling, I'm not going to worry about the consequences of something like that. We can talk some more. There are a number of things I'm concerned about, that we get into things that could put us in. But if a person's in need, I feel like I got to address it. Would add this, though. I am a proponent. Some may not be. I am a proponent. I think that there are professional counselors who really know what they're doing, particularly about things like drug addictions and certain problems. And they're skilled and they know how to deal with it in ways I do not know how to deal with. I think my role as an elder is to help you understand that you have a responsibility to deal with the sin and temptation in your life. And if part of dealing with that is you need to be in some kind of program or counseling or something that will help you to address it, I am going to take a hard stance as an elder and your spiritual helper to say, you better go do this. But I know where my limits are. And sometimes they need that kind of extra help. I think sometimes marriage counseling can be the same too. That one worries me more about the base of thinking and all. I want to know who the counselor is. And so one of the things that so in that black book that I have in the back, I've got a list of a few handful of names of some counselors and others that I know have helped Christians do things. And if y'all know anybody, especially in our area, I'm always looking to add to that list because people come to us all the time.
And I've actually called the counselor. Somebody came, I remember once, said, I'm thinking about going to this person. I called them. They didn't charge me, which I thought was great. Probably took 15, 20 minutes of the time. So what is the basis of your counseling? And they claim to be religious or Christian-based, but I wanted to explore that.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe particular questions about what if this situation
That's right.
We can help people less and less because we're so self-centered, emotionally driven in our culture, in the media, in our thoughts.
I think you had a pointer.
Constantly giving advice mode and maybe end up delving into the unsolicited advice department and then actually harming your influences so much. Do you find that happens a lot? Do you have checks in there that you guys exercise in your lives to prevent that? Or
Have you been,
the wife calling you out on it?
has somebody been calling you about me and informing you of something? No, that happens. I remember a couple came and pulled Kay and I said, I really want to talk to you. And the circumstance was about his mom and some health issues and some things that she was going to have. And, you know, again, not listening as much, talking. I was giving them advice in like 5 minutes into the conversation about what to do. And Kay's like, who made you qualified to provide that kind of advice? But I think isn't that the nature of men? We want to fix things, you know? I mean, you give me the problem, and I'm going to fix it. Sometimes they just want somebody to talk to. They want to know a resource or whatever. But yeah, I'm very susceptible to that. I wish I were not. You know? All right, so a couple of thoughts here. I'm going to go to 15 after. I promise to stop right at 15 after. So this is like a heads up warning. We're supposed to stop at 12, but you know, we started at 10 o'clock in our worship period, and I don't think it ever ends before 11:15. So ending at 12:15 is kind of like ending at 12. Well, there you go. Well short. I'm a good 12 hours short, or almost 12. But if you need to step up and leave at some point. We won't touch on everything. If there's something here you wanted to hear more about, again, hopefully tonight. But what I wanted you to kind of, if you're looking at the sheet here, there is this case study that we won't go through, but it's really meant, if we had time to do it, it would challenge you to think through, man, talk about a member who's got some issues and things, and talk about a member who has some circumstances that could easily feed into a flock shepherding kind of circumstance. That's klearos. And you can tell Marty wrote it because he came up with a Greek name that has no connection to any person. So we've all met some klearoses, just nobody who actually had that name along the way. But what I thought I would do, if you look down at E under where it says new members there, what I would say is, well, maybe even starting up with klearos, the weak member, is think about the special issues that exist as you're dealing with specific kinds of individuals. So here are a couple of those. One of them would be elders dealing with new members. Is that a sheep or flock kind of responsibility? Somebody wants to place membership. What do you think? I could argue it's flock. I think it's more sheep, but I think it's kind of flock too, right? They're joining the flock. And so there's some things there we're going to want to make sure the whole church knows, hey, brother and sister and so have come and they want to place membership and they're now members here and you want everybody to know who they are and all that. So there's some of that. You want to get them engaged in the work of that church. So there's some ways in which it affects the flock. But here are two new, I'm saying it's a couple, here are two new sheep who want to be part of the flock over which the Lord has made you an overseer. Well, what would you want to know in that meeting? Think about that. Now, every eldership, every church, I understand y'all have built in a process here. Now, was it you, Aaron, was telling me, somebody was telling me about a process now to try to meet with potential members here. That's one of those things. You don't have elders, kind of, it's a dicey kind of thing to figure out how are we going to handle that kind of circumstance. But imagine elders. What should they want to know when somebody places wants to be a part of that church? What do you think that they should want to know? Okay. But don't you think that's just kind of obvious? They showed up, they've been worshiping with you. But we don't think that's so obvious. So we have two questions. First one is we want to know if they're a Christian. How do you think we ask that? Are you a Christian? You think that's our question? That's not what we ask. Yeah. Well, how old were you? We can do that. All right, so maybe it's like if they worship somewhere else where, maybe that group of elders did a good job of finding out if they were a Christian. So since they worshiped over there, then they must be okay to come here. I do think that's an important question. I don't know that that's the way I would ask about whether they are a Christian or not. Yeah, here's where I'm kind of leading. You might ask him, well, when were you baptized? Would that tell me, no questions asked as far as men can tell, that this person, because they were baptized? Would I know that from that? Not necessarily. What if they were baptized when they were 3 months old, right? And so what we've learned is that why don't we ask this question in a way that they have to explain how they became a Christian. Tell us about your conversion. How did you come to know Christ? How did you come to be a follower of Christ? And so they'll kind of begin to unlay and tell that story. Now, sometimes it's pretty quick. Oh, I was 12 years old, and my parents, I was raised in the church. I don't like that phrase, but anyway, I was raised in the church, and I was 12 years old, and there was a really great gospel meeting, and I knew I needed to do something, and so I was baptized. You might ask him more questions, but I kind of get it. I think you probably understand what God is asking of someone. But we've had people come and explain how the Spirit came upon them and did whatever. They're really not a Christian. The most difficult conversation we had was a couple came and he has clearly done exactly what the New Testament described. He explained it. And then she starts to tell her story, and she was raised in India and was Catholic. And had never as an adult made a commitment and been baptized. What do you do with that? So we're two of the elders, we're texting each other in the middle. The guy, I think I wasn't the elder of the month. The elder of the month is texting me going, what do I do? I'm thinking, ask another elder. No, but that's a very sensitive thing. And so that question matters. Because if they don't have a relationship with God, a relationship with us as a church is irrelevant. What really matters is, let's teach them the gospel. Here's our opportunity. Here's a chance to learn something. You would think you wouldn't know that, but really that's happened and all, and has led to some good, let's go have that discussion. But wonderfully, people have these amazing conversion stories of how they came to know God and all. I think it was your wife last night I was talking to. Maybe I've got the wrong person, but yeah. She raised a Catholic? Yeah, so I'm pretty sure it's her. And just kind of different stories, about how people come to know Christ and all. That black book is full of these like wonderful stories of those kinds of things happening, and you're beginning to get an insight to someone, right? Like you might find out that they'll tell you that. My parents were faithful and they did this, but my parents have since, one of them fell away. Or I was the only one in my family who was ever converted, and my brothers and sisters are involved in this or that. You begin to hear the stresses in their life, the things that make it more difficult for them to follow God. So that's really important. What else would you like to know? It was not easy. But what we basically just, announced that normally we'd have them stand up. We might not have had him stand up, and we just put in the bulletin, that Jason's wants to be a member and so forth, and we're so glad that he and his wife are here and worshiping with us. But I had a one-on-one conversation, not one-on-two conversation. I sat them down immediately after that meeting, and I explained the difference between him being a member and her not. It needed to be understood, and how welcome she was, and how much we wanted her there all the time, and why there was a reason. You know, there was just a difference, and so that was a hard conversation, but it was. Here's the real key to that, though, is tell them beforehand you're going to ask these questions, and don't go into the meeting before you know the question. You know, I've heard that before. Never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. Yeah, lesson learned. What else would you like to know about a new member? Anything? We ask this question. We ask everybody, are you married? And if you are, is this the only time you've ever been married? If you're not married, have you ever been married before? And all. And it sounds so personal, and it seems, you know, there's so many things we could ask. Why is that one of those questions? It really kind of comes down to this. There's so many different ideas in the world about who can be married and who can't be married that it's possible. And this one we have discovered several times. The answer leads to a recognition that in our viewpoint of what the Scriptures teach, these two people are living in adultery. What if you had two people coming to talk about placing membership, and what you discover is that the two of them have a serious moral issue where teaching needs to be done? Do you want to know that day before they place membership, or you want to figure that out by some other circumstance, happenstance, a year and a half later? You have these two members who are not supposed to be living together. It is a prime example of protecting the flock, and here's your opportunity. They're there. They want to do the right thing, right? It's an opportunity to teach. Now, there are lots of other moral issues. I can't go down through the list. Tell me the last time that you had an issue with drugs. I'm sure at some point in your life you've done some of this. Is pornography an issue that you're struggling with today? Now, would we like to know some of those things as elders about whatever moral issues? Absolutely. It's just that a lot of those, bear with this phrase, can wait. Because they can place membership, it's not going to harm that, you know, it can kind of wait. I don't want it to wait, but I probably am never going to find that out until we've built this relationship. But this question we could get out now and talk about. And we spend some time. Yeah. Oh. Oh, what a problem. That's right.
You know, sometimes one of the things that we'll ask is there anything in your life that we need to know about that we can help you with?
Beautiful.
Because, you know, we had somebody place membership with us one time, and I kind of knew that she struggled with depression, but the elders didn't know she struggled with depression. So I asked that question, hoping she would come.
Right.
She did.
Right.
She said, hey, yeah, I've got this struggle.
That's great.
It's good to know some things like that.
The more you can get out, the more that they would share. That's when we ask sometimes about their family circumstance, and something that causes them to have to be gone, often dealing with issues somewhere else. The more, and so then beyond those two questions, it's kind of like, okay, why are you in Atlanta? Why do you want to come to Embry Hills? What's your job situation? How close do you live to the building? You can go to all kinds of things. Sometimes you want to know them a little bit better, but you're hoping you learn something, maybe like that. And then do something with it. To our shame, we know, I mean, Marty was an elder. We had somebody come, a young man, and he said, he was very open. I used to have this trouble with drugs. I've been clean for this long, and this guy, oh, man, that's a good thing to know up front and all. Except, we didn't pay enough attention. And like 3 years later, we're getting a call because he's trying to get his life straightened out. And he's calling us as elders to say, I've been doing these wrong things for this period of time, and I'm checking in. I mean, he's at the end point. We didn't help him at all. We had the information in our hands, and we really didn't do a good job, in our opinion, of dealing with it. So if you learn something, you want to put it into use. The other thing about new members, hey, They tell you something, you recognize a need, you recognize an opportunity. You know, there's a skill, there's something they can do, there's something they can benefit the rest of the group. Get them busy. Connect them with somebody else who's like them. Here's a woman who comes and she's recently divorced. Her husband has treated her in a terrible kind of way. And she's broken and she's trying to rebuild her life with her kids. Hey, we know this other 2 sisters who've been through the exact same thing. And they're faithful and they're doing this. And so they could be a source of strength to you. Put them together. Work, you know, think about those kinds of things. All right.
You also, based on how the conversation may get where what's just happened
Yeah,
right or why
right.
they come, there's some problem left behind, there's something that needs to be fixed.
This is something elders have to decide. You have to, how are you going to approach it? Our decision where we are, we don't typically investigate your past and all.
Letters are recommended.
Yeah, we don't ask for that. We pretty much take what you tell us, you know, your conversion story, your circumstance. We kind of take it at face value. But you know how it is. You know, sometimes you just know things. You've heard. Somebody's already told you about this person, or they've told you some other things. And if you know they've had issues with another church, back to that church hopping thing you talked about before, well, yeah, you know, you need to go back. You need to fix that. Sometimes our advice has been, happy for you to be a member here. But we first advise you, go back, tell this group that you used to be with where your life is right now, fix things with them, and that will be good for you, that will be good for them, and they will be happy for you to be a member here. Aaron?
The thing that I make a practice of doing, I never ask permission or anything like that, but we have somebody in business from the church here that more than once.
Yeah.
They immediately try to call the elders of that church or
Huh.
so we had a person who showed up in Springfield, and I called Steve, I said, hey, I want you to know they visit, I want you to know what's going on. Is there anything I need to know about? We're not recruiting them, we're not trying to steal them.
But we're curious as to why they're here showing up on our door.
And how can I help you with them? You know, not, you know, you want to know what's best for them, what's best for y'all, and, you know, that's helpful.
That's an interesting approach.
I'm not saying y'all did, but, on social media.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, not just new. We're talking about current members too, right? That is interesting how much information now that just flows back to you automatically from it, right? Yeah. I think it depends on what that issue is. I can think of some issues where I would feel like I need to say something or do that. I can think of some others where, you know, your issue may just simply be a personality kind of thing, and you want them to be able to have a fresh start. And I don't. So I think the answer maybe is depends on the circumstance. I don't recall having had to do that in particular, but.
There have been several, I can see, four or five, where the elders or someone from the other church would call and say, hey, you know.
To tell us.
Right.
Yeah.
And either because well, because the members themselves had some not so complimentary things to say about them. No, I'm trying to think if I've ever thought of
I'm not sure I've done that.
called ahead and said, hey, do that.
Heads up.
And that's what I'm saying, I've had a lot of several,
They've called us.
almost always with really good reasons, and I kind of thought, hey, good call. Two ways, right? That's good that you made that call, and it was a good decision. Right, so I, several, at least two I can think of where we were probably would have withdrawn from the person, you know, had
You had a point?
But I'm not sure how. I think Russ is right. I mean, they were disruptive and they teach that they have a certain doctrine.
That'd be different.
Church, we saw them gathering the Christians around them as soon as they got here, to try to get all of them going. I might, I think it's a Romans 16 thing, where you mark those that cause division. I don't think that's within the local church. That seems to be more standing multiple, where you're just aware of this person. I'm not sure good.
We've gone back to and circle back a little bit. Find out what the real problems were, make sure they're following through.
Oh, that's a good thing. Yeah. Right.
Member and they decide to put somewhere else,
Yeah.
they're going somewhere else. There's no issue.
Yeah, no, we've had to deal with that quite a bit. Of somebody who says, "Look, I've started attending up at this other place." Well, are you going to place membership there? You kind of, so there are some things sometimes you want to kind of follow up to see if somebody's in good hands. Are they doing what they said as they've left you? Because you still feel that responsibility for them. All right, so here's my wrap up. If you have a question, I'll give you a moment. Yeah. Do what? Yeah, at times that's right. And then the follow-up to see if they've lived up to what they said. There's some other things in this material, and you're welcome to ask tonight, about working with deacons. We've talked about that a little bit, with evangelists. Just working with other elders. There's a lot of that. I have come to appreciate the fact that I'm a sheep also. I may be a shepherd. I'm a sheep. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the work that Marty did as a shepherd for me when I wasn't a shepherd. I'm grateful for the shepherding work he did when I was a shepherd, and for these other men that I work with who they care about my soul. They watch over that. That's great. So those kinds of relationships you can think about. The next lesson that, and I didn't put the material in here, I didn't try to load up too much, but would have been part of it, it has to do with your own individual development and all. I want to leave you this last lingering kind of thought that I mentioned a little bit earlier. I think that men who get married, the moment that you now have a wife, you were in a training ground to serve as a shepherd. You don't have to think about it that way. It's not about, it's like, oh, I'm married, now I need to start thinking about how I'm going to be an elder. That's not what I mean. I think you've begun the work, the most important work that a shepherd does. What Ephesians 5 talks about is not just the idea of, husbands, sacrifice for your wife like Christ sacrificed for the church. Absolutely, do that. You be a selfless person. You put her interests first. Do you know what the goal, though, is for husbands in that passage? What they ultimately are supposed to be doing on behalf of their wife? Do you remember that phrase that's in there? It said that they are to present their wife to Christ. Cleansed, sanctified. And so here's my role, the real role. And it took me a long time to figure this out. Here's my real role as a husband. My role is to help Kay be the follower of Christ that she's able to be. To help her be cleansed and beautiful and one day that she'll be standing before the Lord, welcomed in. That's my role as a husband. I got lots of other things I try to do too, but that ultimately is. Does that not sound like what elders are, all this stuff about helping the weak and doing all, isn't that what elders do? And here you are, a husband, and maybe you just got married, you're only 20 years old, 25, whatever, 30, whatever, and you feel like, but you now are kind of the shepherd of one sheep, and you better do it well. What does the passages say about fathers and their children? What are they to do? What's their responsibility? Train him up in that, exactly. Doesn't that sound like what elders do? So now I've got, a son, a daughter, a couple of sons, whatever it is. I've started a family. My responsibility for those children is to bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. That's what elders do. So I'm a father. I am working like an elder does. And then I think about, I've mentioned this a couple times, Galatians 6, verse 1. If I'm spiritual I'm concerned about those that are being pulled back into the world. And I have a responsibility to help to restore them with a spirit of gentleness and look into myself. That sounds like elders. So I'd suggest to all of you that you're probably more qualified than you think, and you've been being trained in different ways that will prepare you, if you do your work as a father, as a husband, and as a servant of Christ, the way you should be, you're already on the path toward being prepared to be an elder. And so just kind of put that vision out there. I think it'd be good to end with a prayer. Steve, if you don't, well, I don't know who to call on here to lead a prayer, but if you could do that, that'd be great. We'd appreciate it.